Buenos dias. Good morning. We're gonna go ahead and start in the next 5 minutes. So we're gonna ask for you guys to start finding your seats. I'd like to welcome everybody today. What a beautiful day. What a beautiful day to be here in the city of Pharr, right? Qué bonito día por estar aquí en esta mañana. Sean todos bienvenidos una vez más en este día al Bridge Connect NAFTA 2.0. Le vamos a pedir ahí a todos los que están atrasito que por favor tomen lo que estén agarrando y en 5 minutos vamos a dar inicio a esta presentación. Okay? Is everybody okay with Spanish? Or yes? English as well. We're fine, right? So one thing that I really want to ask you guys, in front of you guys have that signing sheet. Please sign your name, print, put your email address, and everything that entails where you're coming from, your company you're coming from. Le vamos a pedir ese formato que está ahí en la mesa, que una vez vayan ustedes poniendo su nombre en letra de molde y su número de teléfono, su dirección y la empresa de donde ustedes vienen. Esta bonita mañana, en 5 minutos estaremos dando inicio a esta presentación y va a ser un discurso, vamos a tener un panel, vamos a tener gente fuera del estado y sean todos bienvenidos. Ahí hay café también, So, por favor, miren, ahí les voy a decir algo rápido, les voy a decir. Los asientos de atrás son los que le van a hacer más preguntas. Ahora sí se van a hacer más preguntas y es en serio. This is, the back rows over there, we're going to be asking more questions about NAFTA 2.0 and what it entails, okay? So if I was you guys, come up to the front. Y los de enfrente están premiados. Si usted puso su tarjeta ahí atrás, you guys drop in your business card back there, you guys are going to have the chance to win something, okay? What is it that we're raffling? I don't know, but it's going to be something nice. ¿Qué estamos rifando? No lo sé, pero es algo bonito. Así es que es en serio. Prepárense con los que están ahí atrás, ¿ok? So, fuerte el aplauso a ustedes que están en esta bonita mañana. And tengan un excelente día, ¿ok? 5 minutos. So we're going to call this Bridge Connect the 2.0, along with the NAFTA 2.0, okay? ¿Estamos bien? ¿Están todos aquí ya? A ver, levante la mano el que ya está aquí, despierto, listo para empezar. Eso. We're going to do this in English today. Is that okay with everybody? Yes. Levante la mano el que está bien con el inglés. No queremos incomodar a nadie, ni mucho menos hacer sentir a nadie que se sienta mal. Y si usted tiene una pregunta, un comentario, en su momento va a haber el momento para que usted levante su mano y haga la pregunta. Pero ahorita platicamos un poquito más de eso. But this morning we want to welcome you guys. Today we're going to welcome our bridge director, Luis Bazan, which he's going to do the introduction for our visitors today. And Luis, hand of applause, fuerte el aplauso para Luis Bazan y para todo el equipo de trabajo.
Good morning, buenos días. ¿Cómo están todos? Excelente, excelente. Como pueden ver, I'll do a little bit of Spanish and English. Como pueden ver, esta es la nueva cara de Bridge Connect. Ya es un año nuevo al que vamos a entrar, un año nuevo fiscal nuevo. Entonces vamos a empezar a ampliar nuestros horizontes, como dice la gente, hacer las cosas un poquito más profesionalmente. Esta es la nueva cara de Bridge Connect. Ojalá que les guste. This morning we have a very special program, so we wanted to kick this off with something special that we've done every time we do our trade numbers publication. And there's when we're talking about the rankings for the city of Pharr, number one in produce, number one for avocados, number one in the nation for this, for that, and how we compare to other land ports of entry, seaports, and airports, it's all due to this trade numbers publication, or this study that is done every couple of years. But now, from now on, we're going to be doing it once a year. Because we want for everybody to have the latest and the greatest data about this land port of entry, which is very important to you because you are the end user, you are the importer, you are the customs broker, the truck broker, the person, the company, the business that's using our bridge. Recently, this last week, we launched our brand new toll collection system. I don't know who got to attend that, but whoever was there, you got to also see one of our prime events. This is something that we're going to start getting used to because this is only the start of something great. We have many more projects underway. I know we've been displaying these projects for a number of years now, but I can guarantee you right now that by 2019, first quarter of 2019, we'll start construction on at least two of these major projects. These projects are already at 100% on two of them at the design level and 90% on the other three. So we're very much looking forward to that. So expect more of these big events at the bridge here at the DRC to showcase to launch these new projects. So we're very excited about the future for the city of Pharr, the Pharr International Bridge. On behalf of our mayor, Dr. Ambrosio Hernandez, the city commission, our city manager, we welcome you to the city of Pharr. Welcome to the Pharr South Pharr Development and Research Center, otherwise known as the DRC. There's a couple of people that I wanted to point out that are with us today. We have Chemo Palacios, who is on our board of directors with the bridge. He's in the back. Welcome. And we also have, thank you for being here, sir. And we also have Tony Sandoval, who is Assistant Director for the Pharr Economic Development Corporation. So as you can see, there's a lot of things going on here in Pharr. If we can get things started, we can launch things at the bridge, but it also encompasses working as a team, working with the rest of the city, other departments such as public works, public utilities, but also more importantly, with the Pharr Economic Development Corporation, especially for big investments and big projects. So without further ado, I wanted to introduce you to a person who's been here in the past. I believe he was here back in 2014 when we first did our trade numbers. I believe it was 2013 trade numbers or 2012 trade numbers. And we invited him to participate at Bridge Connect. At that time, it wasn't Bridge Connect. It was just a small conference we put together, but it's been growing into this. And then he came back 2 years ago to present 2015 trade numbers. So this year, he's here again. We invited him again to give you the update on what's going on with Pharr with 2017 trade numbers and year-to-date trade numbers. So things are looking good for the city of Pharr, for the Pharr International Bridge. Please help me welcome Mr. Ken Roberts with World City.
Buenos días. Yo vivo en Miami. The rest of this will be in English. And I'll tell you why. So I've lived in Miami now for about 30 years. And I didn't realize I was going to be there 30 years when I first moved there, but I fell in love with the place immediately. How many of you have been to Miami? Any of you been to Miami? Yeah, it's a great place. Cruise or something else? Doesn't matter. But I said, well, I better learn Spanish. You know, if I'm going to be here, I got to learn Spanish. So I took some Spanish classes, and I read a lot. I'm just a big reader, always have been. So in Spanish and English, sometimes the words sound the same, right? You just put a different accent on it, right? If you don't know it, you sort of fake it, right? So one day in the Spanish class, I was feeling embarrassed. So I wanted to say I feel embarrassed in Spanish. Embarazado. And the professor went, sí, verdad. And at that point, I realized I had probably said something wrong. For any of you who don't speak Spanish in the room, I was not pregnant. So the rest of this will be in English. First of all, thank you very much to Luis Bazan, Freddie Flores, Vanessa, Cleo, for having me here. It's great to be back here. I love being here. It's a great place. I do a lot with international trade, so we publish a number of these publications like Pharr trade numbers around the country. I just happen to have a few with me. We do one for the United States. We do one for the folks up the street in Laredo. We do one for the folks up another street in Dallas. We, of course, do Pharr. We do one for perishables. We've done them for Seattle. We do in Miami for Port Everglades. We do a number of them around the country. And in a minute, we'll look at our website. But I want to thank them for having you. What you guys do here is incredibly important for the commerce of this country, and I think you know that, but I don't want you to lose sight of that. So I'm going to run through some quick figures here with our quick presentation. Some of them you already know. Got to turn it on. There you go. So in the last 14 years, Pharr's trade with the world has set 12 records. And that's pretty impressive. It's grown from $15.21 billion to the total from last year, which was $33.74 billion. Okay, so $35 billion is sort of the next milestone. Pharr ranks number 29. And you may say, oh, 29 doesn't sound like that big a number. There's roughly 475 airports, seaports, and border crossings in this country. Pharr ranks number 29. There you go. Round of applause for Pharr. There's a whole lot of places you've heard of that you do more trade with, okay? Pharr's trade has grown faster than the U.S. average over the last year, over the last 2 years, over the last 3 years, and over the last 5 years. Number 4, Pharr ranked number 4 among all airports, seaports, and border crossings in U.S.-Mexico trade. Number 4. That's pretty impressive. Off to a record pace in 2018. Pharr's trade is up about 4.5%. So this should be a 5th straight record year of trade topping 30 billion, or probably just under 35 billion somewhere. Pharr's trade deficit hit 10 billion for the first time last year. It'll probably drop a little bit because exports are growing faster than imports this year. 3rd in the nation. Pharr ranks 3rd in the nation for the category that includes TVs and monitors. Pharr's exports are largely reception equipment, but ranks 3rd in the nation in that category. Gas exports are surging. The value of gasoline exports have increased 40% this year. It's Pharr's 2nd most valuable export. Pharr has advanced from a number 15 rank in the United States in 2017, number 11 this year for motor vehicle parts, exports. This is all exports we're talking now. And that's largely body parts, brakes, and steering wheels. Cellular antennas and related parts, nationwide exports are down 3%. In Pharr, they're up 25%. Anybody in that space? Anybody doing any business there? Pharr has advanced to rank number 5 nationally for those exports. Those are obviously going to Mexico. On the import side, Pharr ranks number 3 for TV imports. Imports of color TVs, monitors, and related parts topped 1.23 billion through the first 7 months of the year, and that's the latest data. All this data that I'm talking about comes from the U.S. Census Bureau. We download that data and we crunch it. Most Pharr imports are color TVs. There we go. We got some fun-loving avocados. Pharr ranks number 1 for avocado imports. It's ranked number 1 for 11 straight years, and it accounts for about 1/3 of all the avocados that come into this country come into Pharr. 1st in nation. Pharr has ranked #1 in the nation for the imports of berries. In the case of Pharr, it's largely raspberries and some strawberries, and that should say the last 9 years. And I like raspberries, that's why I chose them. There's also a fair amount of strawberries that come in. First in nation with an asterisk. Pharr upended Nogales in Arizona for the first time last year to rank #1 for tomato imports, but now ranks second. Nogales is back on top. But from what I witnessed yesterday, there's a whole lot going on in the tomato import business in this town. And there's some people making some claims that Pharr will be back on top pretty soon, right? Okay. Pharr ranks second to the Port of Los Angeles for imports of both vehicle audio systems, and motor vehicle navigational equipment. All our cars are nothing more than computers on wheels these days, right? That's essentially what they are. And so they're becoming highly technical with a lot more amazing equipment to allow us to do many, many more things. And that's it for my presentation. I'll take any questions you have, but I'm going to ask Freddie, if you can make sure I can get to our website. I'll show you our website quickly. Did I just hit the escape button? I just want to get to our website. Do I hit the escape button and somehow I can get to the website? Yeah, there we go. I might be able to do this myself. There we go. Now, let's see. Can you see that? You can probably scroll it down a little bit. Correct. Somebody will translate it for me, and is there any questions about any of what I talked about there? Okay. I know it's a lot of numbers. I think the important ones to probably remember are Pharr ranks #29 nationally, which is really impressive, really, really impressive. And also the #1 rankings for avocados and berries, and the high rankings for some of those other things. So it's really a great story. And the other thing I should say, and I don't have the exact numbers here, but one of the things people often ask, so how does a community benefit from trade? And I think we all sometimes wonder that, but in talking to Luis yesterday, the amount of money that bridge generates for this community is amazing. And what it does is it keeps your property taxes down, and it allows facilities like this to be built, and it just does so much for your community. And I've been talking to officials both here as well as in Laredo and Eagle Pass, and trying to ascertain what are the benefits to the community from all this trade that people don't always think about. I mean, it's employing all you people, right? All of you have jobs because of trade. But it's also given a lot to your community as well. So this is our website, ustradenumbers.com. How many of you have seen Pharr trade numbers? Have most of you seen it by now? I hope a lot of you have seen it. So, and there's some copies here, and are there copies elsewhere around? Some? Okay. Okay. And so, I should mention one other thing that Pharr is first in the nation for. Pharr is first in the nation for having a trade numbers publication based on a port. Before we had done trade numbers, I've been doing these trade numbers publications for almost 20 years. We always did them on the customs district level. So Pharr is part of the Laredo Customs District. And that's when I got a call from people here in Pharr, and they said, could we do Pharr trade numbers? And because I'm a good entrepreneur, I said, sure. And then I got off the phone and said, I have no idea how we're going to do that. I didn't tell you that, but I had no idea how we're going to do that, right? And we did it, and it became successful, and we've now done a number of other airports and seaports around the country. And then they called and said, could you do it in Spanish? And I said, of course, because I speak Spanish. And got off the phone and I said, I have no idea how we're going to do that in Spanish. So the first one also was the first one done in Spanish, and we just did a second one in Spanish near Miami where I live, Port Everglades. The seaport there did it in Spanish as well. So Pharr is first. Pharr is really a leader in all things, sort of things we do. So there you go. And so this is our website, U.S. Trade Numbers, and this is much of this is available free for anybody to use at any time. And there's a page that shows how, this is the page, I'm probably not connected to the internet here, but this shows how Pharr trades with the nation. It's updated every month. So these annual publications are great, but not surprisingly, they capture a moment. And if you want to see how things are going, we update the website once a month with the latest trade data. And so as you see here, let's see if I have a, haven't used this in a while. If you, up here, you can change it from year to date to month to 2017. You can click on any of these things. I think I failed to connect to the internet, so I'm not going to have the ability to go to see a lot. But there's a page that shows you. So it shows you the top 10 trade partners. You know, Mexico obviously overwhelmingly dominates. I think it's probably in the range of 95% of your trade is with Mexico. That's no surprise. but you can go to a page on Mexico, and it'll show you how. It'll show you, I mentioned earlier that Pharr ranked number 4, so Port Laredo is the beast in that category, then El Paso, then Otay Mesa near San Diego, and then Pharr, and then Eagle Pass is right behind you guys. So you rank 4 with trade with Mexico. And then here's the avocados. And there you'll see Pharr. Pharr ranks ahead of Port Laredo. And this category includes more than avocados, and that's why you see Port of Philadelphia there, because Port of Philadelphia does grapes, a lot of grapes that I think fall into this category. And then Nogales is number 4, and Hueneme in California. I'm going to stand over here so I don't block the screen. Is that the one I want? So this shows you. I'm not sure what this. I have to scroll up to see what it's showing. Oh, this is strawberry. Here we go. This is the raspberry category. So this is strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, and etc. Now, I wish I had the internet connection because it's worth doing. So this is just for the current month. Okay, remember I told you as far as number 1, but it shows up number 4, and I have a feeling I'm not going to be connected to the internet. But if there's a little button here, if you click it to change it to year to date or 2017, you'll see seasonal changes, and so Pharr will suddenly jump to number 1. And I would try to get on the internet, but it would probably take another minute or two, so we won't do it. But on these pages, you can see a lot of data. So you can see by tonnage, by value, by month, by airport, by seaport. You can see how it goes up and down over time. And there's even a little story there that will tell you all about how it's growing. And so there'll be a piece here that will tell you that the Pharr International Bridge in Texas rose 8% compared to last year. So your imports of raspberries largely and strawberries are up 8% this year, the value of those imports. And I'll show you 1 or 2 more pages. So this is navigational equipment. And it shows you Mexico is on, this is on the import side. So Mexico's where we get most of that, some from China. There's the Port of Los Angeles, there's Pharr, number 2, ranked behind the Port of Los Angeles. And if you're number 2 to the Port of Los Angeles, you're having a pretty good day, I'd say. That's a big, big port. And there's no internet, so we won't see that one. And this is then the machinery and parts for semiconductor manufacturing. So, and Pharr is developing some business there as well. So that's how you use our website, ustradenumbers.com. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have about anything. I am what's called, how many of you are baseball fans? So I'm the leadoff hitter. The leadoff hitter is just supposed to get on base. You're not supposed to hit the home run. So we got some really great speakers coming up who are going to really take this to the next level. And unless there's questions, I'm going to turn it over to let somebody introduce Bill. Okay. Thank you very much. So the question was, that's free access. So there's a whole level of it that's free access. Oh, you have the internet now? Oh, so let's do that real quick. We'll do that one. Thank you very much. We'll do that just so I can show you that real quickly. Thank you. Now, where was that page? This is it, I think. Yeah, so that shows, so the Sumas border crossing in Washington, they're importing, I'm trying to think what they're importing. Trying to think what it is. It's not, it might be apples. I forget what it is. But anyway, what you can see is if you switch it from the current month where it's on now to year to date, the map changes very quickly. And look who's number 1 with 36% of the total. So that's how the website, show you the seasonal changes as well, so you can sort of figure out when the seasons are. So the question was, is the data free? So there's thousands of pages that are available for free, and then there is an area that's subscriber-based if you want to dig down deeper. So there you go. So I'll turn it over to Bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. Yeah, it is a pretty cool website. I know when Ken launched this a few months back, when we were starting to work on trade numbers for 2017, he sent me the link took it for a test drive, and I was really amazed at all the data that's up there. Obviously, it is a lot of information, but it's all going to make sense, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to achieve here is the fact that we're growing. So with growth comes a big responsibility for the Pharr International Bridge. And our responsibility to you as the trade, as importers, is to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place in order for you to cross your goods and get them to their market, to the end consumer in time. And that's why these projects are already underway. So the next person that we have is Mr. Bill Lane. Mr. Bill Lane, I got to meet with him last night, had a wonderful dinner with him. I got to learn a little bit more about who he is, what he represents, and he is Executive Director for Trade for America. And he's been doing, my understanding, he's been doing these things around the nation. He's located in Washington, D.C., if I'm not mistaken. So he brings that perspective because today, one of the biggest challenges we're facing is obviously at the national level, the rhetoric that we're hearing from Washington. ¿Qué es lo que está pasando con el NAFTA? What's going on with NAFTA? Are we in? Are we out? Are we going to cut a deal with the U.S. and Mexico only? Is Canada going to be on board? Are they not? So that's what we're here to do. I was just in Miami with some of my colleagues, including some of our folks from the board last week at the Supply Chain Leaders Summit. We get invited to participate in that once a year. And it was just, you know, you go to all these parts of the United States. You're in Washington, you're in California, you're in Miami and Florida, and then you're in deep South Texas. And you're hearing the same story all around because right now, we would be making a prediction if we were to say, this is what's going to happen with NAFTA. Nobody really knows. But that's why we're bringing all this information to you so we can put some perspective into it. How are we accommodating a future NAFTA with new investments? We're going to continue to invest. I know a lot of companies here are continuing to invest. They're investing in fleet. They're investing in warehousing. They're continuing to do business. So this port is going to be alive and healthy, but we're just trying to show you where we're going in the future. So the next person, again, is Bill Lane with Trade for America. Please, round of applause for Mr. Bill Lane.
First of all, it's a real honor to be here. I wish I had a humorous story to tell you why I don't know Spanish. I actually grew up in Miami and left there in high school to Pennsylvania. One thing I found was I was pretty good at one thing. In la biblioteca, ¿quién es ese chico? Es un amigo mío. If we ever have a presentation in a library, I can do this in Spanish. Anywhere else, I'm in a lot of trouble. I came here because this is really a special place. And let me just tell you a little bit about myself, and then I want to tell you about the organization that I represent, and then I want to talk about how right here is the epicenter of U.S. trade. And what goes on here is going to influence the entire nation. I was with Caterpillar for 40 years, for 10 of which I worked in a factory, and then I became a spokesman for the company, and then I ran their international trade advocacy all over the world for the last 20 years. Great company, great career. Young people don't think about working for a company for 40 years. In order to do that, you have to drink alcohol and things of that sort because no one does that anymore. But it was a very fulfilling career. 2 years ago, I started doing some writing for the Wall Street Journal, and then that led to this effort by the business community to try to influence the trade debate. What Trade for America is it's an effort that came pretty much in the second year of the Trump administration. In the first year, most of the focus of the business community was on taxes and on regulation. And the U.S. tax rate had become the highest in the developed world. There was a lot of appetite to lower that rate. That did take place. But in the same token, there was a lot of rhetoric coming out of Washington that largely went unchallenged, particularly as it relates to NAFTA. Over and over again, you heard about how terrible the NAFTA agreement was and how we're going to fix it. And as business people, we all know you can make things better. You also know if you demonize something, you can often make it worse. And the feeling was that we needed to come together to amplify and the message that trade is important, particularly trade with Mexico and Canada. But then that sort of became also a recognition that what's going on with China, what's going on with Europe are absolutely critical to the future of the United States. So the Business Roundtable the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the American Farm Bureau, and the National Association of Manufacturers came together to try to amplify that message. And at the same time, they're also doing their own advocacy to promote trade with, well, particularly with Mexico and Canada. Why do I say this is the epicenter? First of all, what you have in front of you as far as the trade statistics, you know, trade has always been confrontational. It's always been controversial. But you know what? It's always been sort of buried in the middle of the newspaper. You could work on a free trade agreement with Chile, and you could work on it for 5 years. And at the end of the 5-year period, what you're going to end up with is a little 2-paragraph story in the middle of the New York Times that say we have a free trade agreement with Chile. Today, trade is on the front page, above the fold, in every newspaper 3 out of 5 days. I mean, this is a moment where the entire nation and the entire world is trying to figure out what the United States is trying to do on trade, because it affects all of us. You know, in America, you've always had, in all countries, you have export sectors, and they're always looking outward. You have import-sensitive sectors, and they're always worried about more competition coming in from overseas. And then you have consumers. And everybody is a consumer, and everybody wants lower prices, and they want more choices. So when you talk about trade, you're talking about your livelihood, you're talking about your opportunity, and you're also talking about your standard of living. So why is Pharr so important? You know, a lot of times you forget where you are, you're making history. You all handle more commerce, more trade right here than all of the U.S. trade back and forth between the United States and Australia. Australia is a big place. It's the 6th biggest landmass as far as a country is concerned. It has over 20-some million people. And yet you do as much trade right here as all the ports of Australia. Israel, special relationship with the United States. We have a trade deficit with Israel, but nobody focuses on that because it's such an important ally. Yet you do as much trade as we do with all of Israel. Indonesia, the 4th most populous nation on the earth. China, India, United States, Indonesia. As much trade takes place across the international bridge here as all of Indonesia. And then Colombia, which has been one of the great success stories in the last 20 or 30 years as far as engagement by the United States as far as improving. You do as much trade here as you do in Colombia. And if we come back in 2 years, we're going to see that those numbers have all increased, and Pharr is even more important. My only point is that sometimes you don't realize what's going on in your own backyard is changing the world. And what you're doing in Pharr is changing the world. So when you look at the United States as a whole, there's 2 states that have the most at stake as far as NAFTA is concerned. Michigan and Texas. Obviously, Michigan's focus is primarily on Canada. Texas's focus is primarily on Mexico. But it supports almost 3 million jobs, trade with Mexico or with NAFTA. And the numbers are big. So the question then becomes 3 questions. 1, has a trade agreement worked? It's been around for over 25 years now. 2, can it be made better? Can it be improved? And 3, what's the cost if we go in reverse, if we terminate it? Look, trade affects people's lives, for better or worse. But when you look at the macro numbers, there is no way you can conclude other than that this has been a phenomenal success. In the 25-year period, trade with Canada has tripled. Trade with Mexico has gone up 7-fold. 7-fold. I mean, I remember going to Monterey and talking to people saying, you know, what can I buy in Monterey that's cheaper than the United States? And they'd say, I got to tell you, the only thing that's, everything has a 20% tariff on it, Everything's more expensive in Mexico than the United States. And they said, except cowboy boots. So I bought some cowboy boots. That was the only thing you could find that was less expensive. Mexico opened up to the world. Your economy grew. You got a lot of other issues that came with that. Some of Russia. That's 3.8 billion people. So the 115 million people living in Mexico buy more American products, many of which comes through the border here, than 3.8 billion people collectively. And who are we upset with? Our second biggest customer. The average Mexican buys twice as much American products than the other way around. And then when you go to Canada, and right now we don't like Canada, the average Canadian buys 8 times more American products than the other way around. And the news today is that we'll probably we'll let Canada walk away from NAFTA, and there's going to be a panel on that, and we can talk about the details on that. What business in the world focuses on their top 2 customers and then tries to pressure them to do more? When you fly on a jet, if you think the people in the front of the jet aren't treated better than the people in the back of the jet, you got another thing coming. Platinum customers are treated better than other customers. Canada and Mexico are America's platinum customers, and they need to be treated with greater respect. That's not saying it's perfect, but that's saying that we have we have to take a whole different approach. As far as the high-income countries, we export more to Canada than Germany, France, Japan, United Kingdom together. And the other interesting thing is, we started with a free trade agreement with Israel. Then we got one with Canada, and then we got NAFTA. And since then, we've added 17 countries to the free trade agreements. Central America, Australia, Chile, Singapore, a couple of Mideast countries. If you put all those people together, the NAFTA population, the free trade agreement population, it's 400 million people. We export as much to those 400 million people than the other 7 billion people living in the world. And if you put all the numbers together, trade's in balance. It's almost exactly in balance. So the bottom line is, if you really do have fair trade and free trade, it's just the system works. People make a living. People increase the amount of trade that goes back and forth. One last stat is on a per capita basis, consumers in the NAFTA countries buy more American products than other countries. The rich countries tend to buy more American products than the poor countries. The one area where there's a big trade imbalance is China. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But China, half of our trade deficit is with one country. It's done some things right and done a lot of things wrong, and that's where our attention needs to be. It doesn't need to be on our 2 platinum customers. So just overall, you get lower prices through NAFTA, about $10,000 per family. If you're working in an industry that does business related to NAFTA, you're going to end up with, you're going to be making 19% more than others. We have good supply chains. It takes a long time to develop a a reliable supply chain with high quality, and we've done that in North America, and it supports an awful lot of jobs on both sides of the border. Getting out of NAFTA would be catastrophic. I mean, a straight termination would be where you're putting back the 20% tariffs that used to exist, and you're talking about losing 1.8 million jobs in the United States and almost 150, a little over 150,000 in Texas. All this is not to say that it's perfect. NAFTA went into effect before we had the internet, before we had, I mean, a fax machine. I remember it. A fax machine was really cool, and you know, there are things we need to improve, particularly on the energy sector, which was not open to the U.S. at that point. But anyway, we're in a position to make things better, but if we're not careful, we're going to see things dramatically deteriorate. And we'll talk about that at the panel. As far as China's concerned, boy, you know, people love talking about walls. But I sort of come from the philosophy there's one wall that deserves to stay up. It's in China. It's a great tourist attraction. You know, there's other ways to handle our issues than building walls. We've always been bridge-type people. But as far as China, it is a unique problem. China joined the WTO in 2000 based on the relationship in 1999. To China's credit, they did two things really, really well. They've made massive investments in education, and they've made massive investments in infrastructure. And if you go to China, every time you go to China, you see a different China. But at the same token, as a result of that, they've progressed to the point where they don't have to be treated as a developing country anymore. They are a developed country. And we still have trade rules in place that treat them like a developing country. So how do you get them to be a developed country? Do you do it unilaterally, where it's just the U.S. that takes them on? Or do you work with your allies, Mexico, Canada, Europe, and together try to focus on ways to get them to recognize their increased responsibilities as a developed country? So far, no other country has applied tariffs against China. The U.S. is going it alone. We're going to talk about that just in a second. So there's four ways you can do it. One is you can use the established system of the World Trade Organization, which is bureaucratic, it takes years, and maybe there needs to be a shakeup there, because this is a unique problem that affects everybody. You could do the TPP, where you get like-minded countries, that's a Trans-Pacific Partnership, you get everybody together, and then you go and you together try to encourage, coerce, pressure, persuade China to recognize its responsibilities. You can do a bilateral agreement, where it's a U.S.-China free trade agreement. That could be done, but the way to do that is you have to do that with quiet diplomacy. You don't do it by publicly trying to humiliate one side or the other. Or you can have a trade war. And right now, we're in the middle of a trade war. So traditionally, there's certain terms that you hear over and over again. One of which is, nobody wins a trade war. That's not really true. There is someone that wins a trade war, and that's the folks that aren't involved in the trade war. So think about this from your own business standpoint. If all of a sudden the U.S. and China are upsetting the established relationship, and you're living in Canada or you're living in the Mideast or in Asia, what are you trying to do? Now that the U.S. is being viewed as an unreliable supplier, you're sending your best salespeople to China or the United States to try to displace them in their long-established relationships. The place where it's most evident was soybeans, where Argentina and Brazil are displacing American farmers. Some of you may remember the Carter grain embargo, where the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, so the United States unilaterally cut off trade with the Soviet Union. And at a time before fax machines, Canada, Australia, and Argentina completely displaced the United States in the wheat market. And I was in Omaha the day the sanctions went on soybeans, and the farmers said, I said, how long did it take to recover? And they said, we never recovered. When we lost that market, we never got it back. So there are long-term implications to these policies. Autos are next. I used to do some, I'm not saying we're going to go to those type of cars, but I used to do some work trying to promote trade with Cuba, which seemed like it was working for a while, and now it's not. But interesting place. But the auto tariffs are coming. If the new NAFTA doesn't improve our relationship, if the new NAFTA doesn't lower costs and make companies more efficient, the cost of producing a car in North America is going to go up. And if the price of a car, if the price or the cost of making a car in the United States goes up, it means there's going to be increased pressure to put tariffs on European and Japanese car producers. And when that happens, that influences consumer choices, but it also will create all sorts of a backlash as far as trade retaliation. And when you're dealing with autos, you're dealing with big numbers. I mean, really big numbers. And that will have enormous implications. So what do we need? And let me start with the conclusion here. When you work for a firm or in a location that's competitive, all trade tends to be fair. When you're not competitive, all trade tends to be unfair. As long as the administration and the Congress is focusing on lowering taxes, improving education, improving infrastructure, having smarter regulations, that's increasing competitiveness for everybody. And short-term, medium-term, long-term, that's going to have positive results. When you start getting into these counterproductive exercises, it sort of chases itself in the sense that I think we call it the carousel of harm. But terrorists beget more terrorists, which has retaliation, which has excuses, which has demonization. And what happens is we start turning inward. And the one thing we've all learned is America can do anything if we're looking outward, if we're together. But the second we start turning inward on each other, it really becomes counterproductive. Some people ask, okay, so you've been with Caterpillar for 40 years, and why are you doing this? And I have to say, I've got a sort of a personal interest in this. For the younger people in the audience, which is almost all of you, I've got a couple old pictures here from when the Canadian and the NAFTA agreements were passed, just to reinforce the fact that some of us were young at one point as well. I was in charge of the Illinois effort for NAFTA. I used to go around the country and give speeches and what have you. And it was a bipartisan effort, but it was controversial. I mean, it really was. And the Clinton administration played a role, the Bush administration, it was started with Reagan, and Ross Perot ultimately debated Al Gore. But at the end of the day, the vote was bipartisan. And the one thing to always remember with NAFTA, this was not a regulation. This was a treaty. This was an agreement that passed Congress. So Congress is going to have to be involved in changing it. But the most personal part of this, and this is, I'm going to tell you some secrets, was the agreement that preceded NAFTA was the Free Trade Canada Agreement. And that was not really that controversial. It passed by an overwhelming bipartisan majority. And I had just gotten out of working at a Caterpillar factory, and I thought Ronald Reagan was the best speaker I'd ever seen. And I was going, God, how does he do it? So I started doing work in Washington, and whenever he went to an event or spoke at an event, I would get there so early I mean, in some ways, I was the precursor to Monica Lewinsky. I got there so early. I'd be the person that, please don't overdo that. But really, and I would sit in the front row, and I would watch him. I was going, you know, how does he memorize this stuff? You know, there's no teleprompter, and he'd tell these stories, and they were engaging, and I'm going, boy, I could learn to be a better speaker if I could just keep watching him. And it was really, you know, it was a fun time. Well, the day they had the signing ceremony for the Free Trade Canada Agreement, I got in the front row. And President Reagan speaks, and Mulroney speaks, and it was one of those perfect days, you know, where the sky is as blue as you've ever seen it, but it's a little bit crisp. It was in September of 1988, and it was just perfect. And Nancy's upstairs, and she's looking out the window, and you can see this stuff when you're in the front row, by the way. And I'm going, God, this is as good as life can be, and they're paying me to do this job. And so as soon as the presentation was over, I jump up and I grab the Free Trade Canadian Agreement. And I pick it up, and I have my buddy take a picture of me. Now, what you don't see there is the second after I picked it up, 2 Secret Service guys grabbed me. And they said, you know, you can't do that. This is a really important agreement. This is going to the American archives. And the same thing is true. I didn't grab the NAFTA agreement, but the same thing was true. These are agreements that go down in history for generations and forever and ever. So they pulled me away. You know, it was a different time. No one yelled at me. You know, they just said, don't do it again. And but the reason why I care so much about this is in Washington, D.C., the biggest compliment a lobbyist can ever have is they go, well, you know, that piece of legislation, my fingerprints are in it. Well, I'm going to tell you this right now. I was just a junior guy then. My fingerprints are not in the Free Trade Canada Agreement, but my fingerprints are on the Free Trade Canada Agreement. So it means a lot. What you do on a day-to-day basis changes the world here. What you do in the political sense changes the world. I can't help but think that the level of commerce is so great that takes place right along this road that we're not ultimately going to prevail, but it's important for everybody to keep talking about it and keep reminding people that we can always make trade fairer, but trade is absolutely in our DNA. It's always been in our DNA, and it gives us a higher standard of living, and it allows us to look outward and promote peace and understanding. So we're going around the country trying to encourage others to tell their trade story. We don't lobby in Washington. We try to promote people to talk about why Canada is important, why Mexico is important, how we can do a better job with China, how we can do a better job with Europe. But more than anything else, we're out there trying to encourage people to not look inward, look outward, and take advantage of the moment. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. That's okay. Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Minerva Loera, and I work with Loera Customs Brokerage. So I've been in business for 30 years, and I suppose more than a question, or yeah, it's a question. How do you work? I understand we favor trade.
Well, you're allowed to. You can make a speech. It's okay.
Okay, but the question would be, how can we make trade fair? Because we saw what the great benefit that NAFTA is to this region, but we also know how, example, automobiles, you don't find them in other places like in Europe, other countries, because those rates are very high.
That's right.
And so when we talk about fair trade, how can we make that statement, or how can we improve on that statement so that other countries, open their doors the way the United States does, because we are a witness to how much those products pay in duty rates and what we need to do to comply. The U.S. is very, very open in helping industry, and sometimes we see how in other countries it is not reciprocal,
Great question, and for all the young people in the audience, let me just give you one trick. A lot of times you're in a public forum and you want to make a point, and the speaker always says, "Oh, I'm only taking questions. I don't want to hear speeches." Baloney, I want to hear speeches. But if you ever want to give a speech and make it a question, you make the speech and then you go, "And what do you think about that?" And then it's a question. So the question is, what do I think about that?
So
no, it's a good one. A couple things. First of all, you have to start with the assumption, do I want to make it fairer, or am I looking for some type of protection? And let me just give you a Caterpillar example. And we did a op-ed in the Wall Street Journal maybe 2 months ago. When they were doing the GATT-Uruguay round, Caterpillar sent a letter to the United States Trade Representative, and it said, it wasn't a long letter, it was actually just a short 2-page letter, and it said, we think our customers benefit the most from open trade. Now, the U.S. has tariffs around 4%, and Europe has tariffs about 8%, and developing countries have tariffs over 10%. If you could get all the developed countries to go to zero, we'll go to zero. And we said, this is sincere. We're not going to, it's not a gotcha moment or anything like that. And we sent it to the USTR representative was Clayton Yiter, and they said, we'll try. And it started getting credibility. And then the toy manufacturers said, we're willing to do the same thing. And the ag equipment manufacturers and the distilled spirits, people in Washington really like duty-free distilled spirits. So they got on board, and we ended up with 10 sectors of the economy that the U.S. agreed to lower their tariffs to zero, and Europe, Japan, Canada, the real rich countries decided to go to zero. It wasn't perfect, but we got about half the GDP of the world to go to zero. And that's been in place ever since. That was, we weren't trying to game the system. It was a sincere effort. We lobbied for it, and at the end of the day, it worked. And then we got some of these free trade agreements, and for some companies, Chile's not a big market, but for Caterpillar it is, same with Australia, and about 60%. Now there's other industries that are more sensitive to imports, and they wanted to make sure that their level of protection did not go down. So how do you thread the needle? First of all, as a country progresses, they're supposed to lower their tariffs. That was always the assumption. But what has happened is since the 1990s, it's too hard. So there hasn't been a major trade agreement. China joined the WTO in the year 2000. They should have lowered their tariffs many times since then as they progressed. But we don't do trade agreements. It's too hard, or there's not enough will. Now, maybe one of the great things that will come out of this administration is the recognition that if you don't change things, it's going to be changed for you. So that could be a positive. There is more of a sense of urgency than we've ever had before. Now, my biggest concern is the way we're doing it. Normally quiet diplomacy and selective pressure is the way to get results, especially if you're dealing with a democracy where, what goes on in a country is seen all over the world. We're trying to do this through bullying, and I'm not sure that's going to work, but what I do think is when we try to do this again, there's going to be a sense to seize the moment and China's got to go down. I mean, there's, you know, right now we're doing all the heavy lifting and everyone else is going to take advantage of it. It'd be better if we worked with our allies and did it together. If you look at those 20 countries with free trade agreements, has anyone ever had a complaint with Chile? I mean, we got rid of the tariffs. Exports from the United States to Chile tripled. Imports from Chile to the United States went up threefold. They got heavy machinery and mining equipment, and we got fresh grapes in the winter and more wine. You know, cheaper, better quality wine. How can you lose on that one? So, you know, the point being, you know, if you really do get to the point where a free trade agreement tends to be pretty fair, it could always be made fairer. But for those 20 countries, I really don't hear about a lot of demonization. The only one that jumps out, or the only two, were Korea and Mexico. And that seems like, you know, at least they're trying to resolve those issues there. But you got to stay on it. You can't just do this and say, you know, we're going to put a stake in time. You know, as a country progresses, they have a responsibility to increase their openness, if you will. Accountability is important. Yeah. They've gone 20 years without doing anything. It's time. So, other questions? Yes, sir.
Morning, Crispin Flores from CNJ Logistical Services. You mentioned that there would be a loss of 1.8 million jobs if the free trade agreements go away. That's what I understood.
Yes. Well, it's NAFTA, but go ahead.
Okay. Is that nationwide or is that?
That's nationwide.
Nationwide. How long do you?
That's over a 1 year period, according to the study.
1 year period.
Yeah. It's. I mean, this would be you revert back to the 20. You know, Mexico reverts back to the tariffs that they had before NAFTA, which was 20% for most products, and the U.S. then goes back to its tariffs and the restrictions that it had in place. The same thing happens with Canada. So.
So you would see a lot of the companies leaving Mexico for other places?
I don't know what happened. You know, I think a lot of it depends on, you know, do you think this is long-term or short-term? You know, when you start changing supply chains, that's a long-term decision. If you think this is something that's going to be worked out over a short period of time, you tend not to. I mean, obviously you reduce costs, but you tend not to.
Thank you.
Well, you know, but you remind me of one other thing, and this is a challenge that we all have. Caterpillar used to have a factory in Brampton, Ontario, and it was built there because Canada had a 10% tariff on wheel loaders, and they built it there as an assembly facility so that they didn't have to pay the 10% tariff on wheel loaders. Well, when the free trade agreement occurred, they started lowering it over 5 years, and when the tariff got down to 4%, the company decided, you know, it doesn't make sense to build these in Canada. They should be built in the United States. And they went to North Carolina, and they built a state-of-the-art facility in North Carolina. And, you know, we hired 600 people. And all those people were tickled to death. You know, good people. We interviewed them. Everybody in Canada lost their job. And they all blamed free trade. Every one of them. If we didn't have free trade, I'd still have my job. Everybody in North Carolina, they think they got their job because of their good looks. They interviewed well, and they got a job. Not one person in North Carolina felt they got their job because of free trade. On top of that, by getting rid of the tariff, those wheel loaders could be sold to the extraction industries in West Canada, and the price of extraction went down, and they hired more people, and not one person there believed they got their job because of free trade. They got their job because of good looks. So we got too many good-looking people in Canada and the United States, and nobody on any part of the triangle thought they got their job because of free trade, but there's 500 or 300 people who are sure they got their job or lost their job because of free trade. So we have to do a much better job explaining and talking about both the winners and the losers to these transactions. And of course, some of the biggest winners are the consumers, and that's really hard to break through. Thank you. Good. Thank you very much. This has been an honor to be here.
Thank you very much, Bill. We appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and take a quick 10, 15-minute break because we're serving lunch. As you know, this is going to go past the lunch hour, so we wanted to give you something to snack on. So please take your time with that, and we'll start setting up for the panel. Up next, we're going to have Interlink Trade Services, Jorge Torres. We're going to have Hastings. We have Adrian Gonzalez from Hastings, and we also have Crispin Flores, who just asked a question from C&J Logistical, and he's also the president for the Mid-Valley Customs Brokers Association. side conversations, and we respect that, but we also want to respect the time of our speakers, our guest speakers. So hopefully everybody got something to eat. If you don't, if you haven't had anything to eat, please, there's plenty more where that came from. So again, we're going to continue with the program. The last part of our program is going to be the panel of speakers. This is our local perspective. Even though they're trading globally, even though they're trading internationally, this is a local panel of speakers. So if everybody could just have a seat, please, and then we'll get going. And then I'll introduce them again, because I got a little bit ahead of myself a few minutes ago. Started. It looks like the majority of you are already sitting down. Once again, I want to give a big thank you to Ken Roberts from World City and to Bill Lane from Trade for America for coming out, for making the trip, for joining us for dinner last night, and for speaking so well about Pharr. We didn't pay him anything. I promise you we did not pay him 1 cent. So again, just a big thank you for that. So as you can see how this thing is developed into what it's now going to what we're going to kick off right now, which is as I mentioned, our local representatives talking about NAFTA and the importance of NAFTA and how it'll affect either in a negative way or in a positive way what will happen in the future. It's not just for the produce industry or the maquiladora industry, but that's all encompassing. I mean, right now, we could consider ourselves to be also the #1 for petroleum gases, for oil and gas. We're crossing about 200 to 300 tankers every day going southbound into Mexico, coming in from the port of Brownsville. So obviously, you know, something is happening here in Pharr. So up next, we'll start off with the Mid-Valley Customs Brokers Association. We have our current president, which is Crispin Flores. And his company is C&J Logistical Services. And we also have our past president of the Mid-Valley Customs Brokers Association, Mr. Jorge Torres with Interlink Trade Services. And then we also have Adrian Gonzalez with Hastings.
Luis,
yes.
Current Vice President of the
Current Vice President. I apologize for that. Current Vice President. When will you be the president? Next go around? Next year?
January.
So congratulations to everybody here. And so we'll get started. This is going to be, I think that the way Freddie has it formatted is he's going to give a quick introduction And then he's going to kind of open it up into questions based on some of the more important features or some of the important topics that are happening within NAFTA. So without further ado, I'll give it over to Freddie. He'll be the moderator for today, and then we'll get started. And please, don't be shy. Ask questions. I tend to see that everybody kind of shies away. Everybody, you'll step up, say a few questions, but I know on the sidelines, you know, we want to ask all the questions. This is the time to do it. This is the time to speak with the experts. This is the time to get your answers. And if you don't get your answers, trust me, we'll find an answer for you or at least get you in the right direction. So again, welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Luis. Fuerte el aplauso, Luis. Yes. Well, once again, thank you. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Ken. Luis, he already done the introduction for the panel. So today we're going to be discussing NAFTA 2.0 and its impact on produce and the maquiladora industry. How many maquiladoras do we have here today? Or that work with maquiladoras, brokers that work with maquila. Keep it up, keep it up. Así, alta, alta, que se mire alta. Okay, so how many it's within the produce industry? Keep it up. Okay, see, so it's good. So it's a pretty good half. So today we're gonna be discussing NAFTA 2.0, and why is it important? So we're going to start with Mr. Torres. Mr. Torres here, that Jorge, give yourself you want to break it in, break the ice, tell him something? We want to test the mic?
Yeah, in English, Spanish?
English or Spanish? Are we okay with English? Everybody
Inglés,
okay?
español.
Si no entiende el inglés, por favor diga, ¿sabes qué? Me lo puede repetir en español. Y una cosita antes de iniciar, just before we start, those two mics are in the middle, in that aisle, the center. If you have a question, please feel free to stand up. Stand up and walk to the mic, okay? The mics are on. And I guess you might want to raise your hand, but no, I don't know what he means by that, but yeah, the mics are there. Tiene una pregunta, pase por favor ahí, pase aquí en medio, y use ese micrófono sin ningún temor ninguno, sin una pena alguna, okay? Hoy es el momento, today's the moment. Right now it's a moment for you guys to come up with all those questions that you might have. You guys come up to us and ask us. We are not the expert in this. Everybody's learning, we're learning with this, okay? NAFTA, it's a conversation, it's a topic that's been going up and forth for I don't know how long, probably the 9 months or 10 months right now. So, recuerden, ¿qué vamos a hacer si tenemos una pregunta? If we have a question, what is that we need to do?
Yes.
Vamos a preguntarle ahí a Mr. Garza there. Alberto Garza, ¿qué vamos a hacer si tenemos una pregunta? Eso. Eso, Javier. CIC is in the house. ¿Qué vamos a hacer, Javier? ¿Y qué tenemos que hacer hoy día, Alex? Ask why. Why is it important to ask? That way you guys, you know, we can use the panels. They're the experts here. So Mr. Torres, go ahead. Introduce.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for being here. As Freddie mentioned, we're going to be talking about NAFTA, and we call it NAFTA 2.0, the new NAFTA or the new free trade agreement. As a lot of you know, there are a lot of unknowns right now with the NAFTA renegotiations that have been happening for almost a year. We're in the same boat as pretty much as most of you. What we're gonna try to do here is try to put in perspective some of the information that is currently available and create a dialogue amongst ourselves because there's different reports, different information out there that might have some miss or interpret things differently. So the goal here is to put things in perspective of what we know so far and then take that information and digest it and see if we can make some sense out of it. Hopefully at the end of this week we'll have the final document published. So when that happens, then we can have more clear information. But it's a dialogue that we want to create. So this panel will be also acting as moderators for everyone. So we will really appreciate and encourage everybody's participation. Also, we're dealing with the reality. We don't want to be political. We don't want to get into whether we agree or not. I guess we all agree that free trade is good, but we don't want to get into the politics side. So we have to deal as professionals with what we have right now and make the best out of it. So with that, I'll pass it on to Adriana. I don't know if you have any comments.
Thank you to the Pharr International Bridge for the invitation, to Ken and Bill for such great presentations. Thank you. That was very, very important numbers. And when we look at numbers, things make more sense, right? So thank you for that. And yes, as Jorge was saying, there are many unknowns, but yet we do have some interesting information, and the idea is to share it with you. I know you have in your specific company, your specific industry, you have more details. So please, if you have more details, something to say, please do ask and comment. That will make the panel more interesting. So thanks again for having me.
Still morning. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for Pharr Bridge for putting all these events. It's very important that we look at these issues, these items. As my colleagues have stated, it's important that we look at the information. There's going to be additional information coming out, hopefully at the end of the week. And it's important that all of you, or all of us, be informed, do a lot of reading, make sure we try to get as much information as possible so when it does become a reality, we're ready to go.
Well, once again, thank you. Thank you, Hastings. Thank you, CJ Logistical, and thank you, Interlink Trade. Thanks again, everybody. Welcome, a hand of applause for them and yourself. So así vamos a dar inicio fuerte el aplauso a ellos. This is what we would do. This is our format today. We would go over the main changes on NAFTA 2.0. We would then go to our panelists for comments and questions. We will give our panelists 2 minutes approx. You will also have the chance to ask comments of any matter, okay? And also, as you heard, todos los panelistas hablan español. Todos hablamos español, so por favor, nadie se quede callado. Va a haber premios para que pregunte más preguntas, eh? Vanessa, do you have them? Do you have the prizes ready for for them that are asking more questions? Do you have it? ¿Sí? Ok, es todo. Fuerte el aplauso a las mujeres que también pusieron todo esto junto. Fuerte el aplauso a todos los que estamos aquí una vez más. Okay, so once you see that little, I don't know if you can see the little green light. Yeah, it's too far away. Well, that little square, whenever we see that, that's when, if it's on my left, ahorita les explico, I'll explain to you guys, but that's when we're going to be able to ask questions, okay? Salvador Dominguez, bienvenido. So what are we going to do, Salvador, if we have a question today? And we're going to go to the mic. Ya se ganó un premio Salvador por haber estado poniendo atento ahí. So let's start our panel here, okay? Should we be celebrating, Mr. Torres? This is for Mr. Torres. Okay, so you guys are going to help me out. You guys are going to help me out. And these are questions, okay? So should we be celebrating for this preliminary agreement on NAFTA 2.0?
Well, I think from where we were at last year, a lot of us were concerned and worried about that NAFTA was going to go away. So as of now, we do have some preliminary, or at least an agreement between the United States and Mexico. So to some degree, I think, yes, we should be celebrating, cautiously celebrating, because the two countries finally came to terms. What will happen, what will be the final product after that, we'll see. But yeah, there's some cautious celebration, okay?
That's good. So then that means that we should be celebrating. So that means that we need to give an applause to that, that we're supposed to be celebrating. So what's your concern on this, Mr. Gonzalez?
Well, it's interesting because overall I think that regarding certainty, that is a major part of the investment that goes on along the border. This preliminary agreement gives more certainty to the investors and maquiladoras and people investing their money into the region. Now, overall, and I'm sure we're going to cover those, this is not an overall more open agreement. This is a closer agreement. It has more requirements on the industry. So in that regard, it's not that good of a new deal. But considering what's going on in the United States and the world, I think this is a reason to celebrate. So I agree that this is as good as we have, and we should embrace it.
But as well, it's only a preliminary agreement.
Exactly, yes.
So it can change any time.
As Jorge was saying, I'm sure you'll cover it, but Canada has not confirmed their acceptance of the agreement. We're still pending to see the full text, so it's not for sure. So yes, we're still waiting for the final word on this.
Okay, we'll go to Mr. Flores. What are the pros and cons of the agreement, Mr. Flores?
The pros and cons. Pros, as we know, this area has grown a lot because of NAFTA. Back in 1994, when NAFTA was implemented, this area, especially this area, the Pharr, Hidalgo, McAllen area, was smaller than the Brownsville area. So that's one of the pros of the free trade. The cons of the free trade is that other areas of the country will get affected. Just like we benefited from this treaty, other areas will have some issues with their employment or unemployment. So I believe those are the pros and cons of the free trade agreement.
Mr. Torres?
Yeah, well, like Crispin mentioned, this area benefited tremendously with NAFTA. The trade created a lot of jobs in the border area, logistics, custom brokers, transportation companies, bridge revenue, as you know. So it is an economic, positive economic impact. So overall, I mean, there are pros, but also, like they mentioned, some of the cons are, which it's not proven 100% that the displacement, there were displacement of jobs in industrial areas in the United States, but a lot of it is attributed, or at least they think that it's attributed to NAFTA, and that's why I think we're having this renegotiation, because according to the Trump administration, it is not a fair trade deal. So that's more of on the cons, the perception of NAFTA. Whether or not it's 100% truth, I think there's other issues such as labor unions, technology, robotics that have also impacted the displacement of jobs in certain industrial areas. But I mean, it can be seen as a negative. So.
Good. Mr. Gonzalez, we'll go to you now.
Well, as my colleague stated, yes, I mean, I do think they have mentioned the main cons and pros of the agreement. I think that overall, as Bill was saying, it has always been very political how trade is foreseen in the country. Even the benefits of free trade, a lot of people don't really understand or know the benefits of free trade. And I'm sure we can have a debate over other states or other regions. What I do know for sure is that our region benefits from free trade. I know we're all a big community, all the livelihoods, everybody here depends on free trade. So I say it definitely benefits our region. It has for many years, and we should continue fighting for it and discussing it and doing our best to maintain what we have and grow our international trade.
Great. So knowing that Canada has yet not signed, and Friday is the deadline, why is it important for Canada in this agreement? Mr. Flores.
I think it's important for Canada to sign on because it gives us a better view of the North America Free Trade Agreement, although that's not what it's going to be called. But it's, in my opinion, it's important that we are able to flow traffic or trade through the U.S. into Canada and back and forth without any issues. We can do it now, but if Canada is part of the NAFTA or the trade agreement that's supposed to be coming into play, it would be a lot easier on the companies that are importing and exporting.
Mr. Torres?
Yeah, it is important for Canada to be part of the agreement. That's the original agreement. NAFTA was Canada, U.S., and Mexico. I also believe that by having Canada part of this trade agreement again or continue, we'll have Mexico will have more leverage in negotiating. Like, for example, right now, we're going to discuss it later, but the Section 232, the steel and aluminum tariffs, I mean, they're still in place. So Mexico is pushing for Canada to be part of the trade agreement because that will have given more leverage as a whole to put pressure on the United States to at least either get rid of Section 232 or put quotas in place. But yeah, I mean, it will be more beneficial. And also, if it's going to pass through Congress, it will be, you know, it will be easier for it to pass if all three countries are part of the agreement.
Great. Mr. Gonzalez, what's your input on this?
Well, I think Canada is very important. I know that for a fact that many of the products crossing in through the port, they have the end destination being Canada, right? So a lot of produce, a lot of automotive parts as well. So that is the importance of Canada in this agreement. Now, the question I have is, Mexico being a member of TPP and Canada being a member of TPP, is Mexico covered with Canada through TPP? So that's also an interesting part of the equation. I've read that Mexico said, you know what, we'd rather start this negotiation with the United States because if Canada goes away, we have TPP. So that's what I read, you know, and that's, I guess, a question for our friends and the Mexicans, that they're very much more aware of TPP. I learned that Mr. Trump pulled out TPP, and I stopped reading a lot about it, but I know that Mexico is a member, and it's very important for them. So yes, definitely yes.
Great. So now we'll go to you guys, the audience. Any questions, any concerns within this topic? Time's running. Hagan sus preguntas. ¿Alguno de ustedes? ¿Todos estamos bien? Mr. Lane, got something to add to this. Thank you, Mr. Payet. Way to go, Lane.
Let me just ask, from your point of view, how much of the anxiety, whether it's U.S.-Mexico, whether it's U.S.-Canada, is from the approach that we're taking to negotiate trade, and how much of it is relates to the substance of our differences between these countries?
Well, I think that ultimately, my take is in our region, I believe that what we have right now will continue ongoing and will continue to flourish. My concern personally is future investment and the future expansion of the produce and the maquiladora industries, which is what ultimately we want, right? Growth brings growth to everybody. I think that initially the countries, or on the Mexican side, they believe that Mr. Trump will not move forward with any measure at all. So it was sort of, they weren't that concerned. But as Mr. Trump started with the first Section 201 duties on washers, please correct, Section 201 duties, yes, and then he continued with Section 232, and then we see he's moving forward very aggressively with Section 301. I believe that Mexico said, this guy is for real. So he will, even if he damages his own consumers, the U.S. consumers, he will move forward with this. So I believe Mexico said it's our time to make an agreement the best that we can and get this uncertainty out of the way, because all the foreign investment is starting to suffer because of this. So I do believe that it started as nothing will happen, and it became like something more serious. That is my opinion.
Mr. Torres?
Yeah, I mean, it's more of the concern of how the negotiations transpire and the aggressiveness and the rhetoric that the administration has, more than the substance. And like Adrian mentioned, it's like, this guy is for real, so we better get something up there, whether it's the best thing that we can come out. I know that Mexico's Secretario Guajardo has been criticized by not doing the best agreement for Mexico with all the different concessions that they made, but it was like, whether we do something right now or it can get worse. So that's what happened.
When President Trump won the election, the day after, I received a lot of calls from my clients in Mexico asking us if he was going to do away with NAFTA. And obviously, at that time, there was no answer to that question. And I think the concerns of the Mexican industry have created this event that Mexico has renegotiated part of the NAFTA agreement. And not just due because of the concern. Initially, people were very concerned that it was going to be gone from one day to the other. But we didn't, well, it wasn't know how he would go about it. Now we know he's been at it for over a year now, trying to renegotiate with Mexico. He finally got it. So I think that'll put a little bit of a calmer sense on the Mexican industry for, like Adrian said, investments into the area.
Mr. Lane, is that good enough? Yes, please. Please, just like in Miami. Español, si usted gusta.
Estoy embarazado. So, real quickly, because somebody mentioned the washing machine, so this will be a statement before the question, but so we did two things. We put steel tariffs in place, steel and aluminum tariffs, to make it more expensive to bring that into this country. At the same time, we made it hard for LG and Samsung to import their washing machines into this country, right? So in the 3 months after that happened, the cost of a washing machine in this country increased at the fastest pace in 40 years. they've been collecting the data. So if you think nothing happens when you put tariffs in place, something does happen. So we have to be aware that as these tariffs go into effect, you'll see impact. But now to my questions. I learned from Bill there's got to be a question at the end after you go into your soliloquy. The reason this date of September 30th is important is for one reason and one reason only. They want to have this in place before the presidency changes in Mexico, right?
Right.
What is the presidency of Alamo going to be like? As concerns trade.
Well, we don't know yet. I mean, he's also a surprising character like Mr. Trump, I think. I mean, he supposedly he's calmed down and he said, you know, that he's going to get along with Mr. Trump very well, and vice versa. Mr. Trump has said, yeah, great guy. So, I mean, during this last phase of the renegotiation, I know that the people from the López Obrador team were part of the final negotiations. So, I hear that they had some input and some positive input in the final negotiation. So, in my opinion, I don't think nothing's going to happen. It's going to go and move forward. But again, nothing will surprise me right now. So we'll just wait and see. But like you said, yeah, to be cautious, the clock started ticking, when he made the announcement, President Trump, on August the 30th, that of his intent to signing the new agreement. So that started the clock ticking for the 90-day period. So hopefully, we'll have it signed before that. So we'll see.
I think, yes. I mean, initially, there was this concern that Mr. Obrador was going to say, I'm going to take over and then I'm going to start doing what I feel is best. I think he realized that the majority of the Mexican economy is dependent on international trade, so he did not want to mess with that, I think, and he wanted Mr. Peña Nieto to close the deal, maybe to say, hey, if it was bad, it was Peña Nieto, it was not me, maybe. I mean, that's what I think. And he's wanting to, in my opinion, focus on internal issues that is going on in Mexico. I think that he wants to help people that are located more in the southern state location of the country that are impoverished, and we know that's a bigger issue, and it's another subject. So I felt he said, you know what, the northern and central states that are benefiting from international trade, I don't want to mess with that. I don't want to cause a panic that is going to make the peso devaluate. So I just don't want to mess with that. So, and it was a surprise to me, honestly, and I think it was the best course he could take, I think.
I think it's important to have it signed before the new administration comes into Mexico, because I think if they leave it on the table long enough, then they'll go in and they'll nitpick it or make changes to it. That's my opinion, and I'm in agreement with Adrian that he wanted basically Peña Nieto to deal with it, and it's off his plate. I mean, yes, he did have some input, his people had some input, but I think more than anything is he didn't want to deal with it. If it stays on the plate long enough, then I think he'll come back and say, okay, let's redo this thing.
Great. Any more questions over here? Yes.
Hi, this is Oscar Garcia from Continental in San Luis Potosí, Mexico. I would like just to add something to this point, not as a question, but as a fact that in Mexico we know that the new president is being, or in his campaign, he was very conservative about doing in Mexico what we need to do and try not to import so much. But I think, honestly, that's not going to happen. I mean, we will be remaining with the trade commerce that we are doing with the U.S. because it's impossible to do everything on our own. That's the first one, I think. And the other one I have is, for us being maquiladoras, what is the main changes that we would like to, that we should be focused on this NAFTA 2.0?
Flores.
The biggest changes coming to the maquiladora industry are in the automobile industry, and the textile industry.
I don't know what industry you're working, but I think those are the main ones. We still don't know all of the details, but in the automobile industry, it will require that instead of having a 62.5% regional value content, it'll be going up to 75%. So those are just some of the details. There's another detail on there that 40 to 45% of the value of the vehicle has to come from an area that pays their workers $16 an hour or more. Okay, the rest can come from wages that are paid less. That's just in general what we know. We don't know very specific as to any tracing of the auto parts or anything to that effect. The full text has not been published yet. Hopefully by this weekend it should be published.
Okay, yeah. This is actually, I'm coming from automotive side, so that's one of the
What I would suggest to you, Oscar, and everybody in the maquiladora industry, be very in touch with your customers right now, right? We don't have all the information. I know Freddie is going to present some general information, but right now, be very in touch with your customers as soon as the information comes out and ask them, what can we do for you? Is this going to affect the relationship we have? Should we do something different, or are we okay with what we have? Especially in the automotive industry, we're seeing some changes that the customer may say, now we need your components to be sourced from other places in the world, right? We need it to be produced under $16 an hour, so that can happen, right? I know Continental being such a big company, maybe you will need to say, well, then I'm going to produce this in Germany. I mean, this is just an example, right? And the other is, if you have a NAFTA, your products qualify for NAFTA, look into maintaining that qualification of NAFTA eligible, right? That would be helpful. If there are changes to your specific product, please look at them right away. Make sure that you continue to qualify for NAFTA. And if not, see if you qualify for marking your products made in Mexico, right? So that's an advantage. So all of these rules of origin, all of these compliance activities is going to be very important that companies dive right away into learning the changes and see what is their impact to your own product and to your customers. That would be my comment.
Yeah. In regards to rules of origin, which is the big impact that the maquila industry will have, the big chunk of it is in the automotive industry. Yeah, there are changes in textiles, chemicals, and some metals, and telecommunication equipment, fiber optic cables, etc., which we know already are going to happen. But not all rules of origin change. So, but the biggest one is the automotive industry, and the sourcing and supply chain for the automotive industry has to be monitored very carefully in order to continue meeting the content rules and also meeting that 40 to 45% being made in entities that pay $16 or more per hour to their workers. How all that is going to be implemented and used or implemented, we still don't know the mechanisms. But right now, more than ever, focusing on the supply chain and the sourcing and the routings of the shipments, it's going to be critical to ensure that you keep meeting that NAFTA qualification.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Just please, panelists and audience, whenever you're going to ask, for purposes that we're doing this live stream, please get closer to the microphone. That way you can.
Lois, my name is Lois Kim with PPC Farms. Could you address the new NAFTA 2.0's effect on the produce industry? So when it was first announced, after when we had the uncertainty, the USDA announced that they will be helping the exporters, like cotton growers or soybean growers in the United States, who are negatively affected by the trade conflict. But now that we are entering this phase, how is it going to affect the produce industry, especially the ones who are importing from Mexico, and also the agricultural industry in the United States in general? How the ag industry in the U.S. will be affected by NAFTA in terms of the volume of trade that you expect, either positive or negative? Thank you.
Okay. We had a provision, or there was a provision being discussed in the negotiation about seasonalities, meaning that when there were produce off-season in the United States that they can import from Mexico and vice versa, duty-free. That was concerning. Now it's kind of clear from what was negotiated that produce will be the least impacted industry. It's pretty much free. So there's no big impact, a negative impact under the NAFTA, the new trade agreement for produce. I don't know if you have any comments to that.
Well, the only thing else is on the U.S. growers is that for exporting purposes, they're not going to be allowed to use any subsidies or any other help from either the World Trade or any other organization to be able to do that.
I think that the end of the seasonality clause was a major win for our region. It was very, very concerning. I mean, we can all imagine what will happen if they say, you know what, we have plenty of tomatoes from Florida, so no tomatoes from Mexico right now. That would be very, very disastrous for anybody importing tomatoes, of course, and anybody related to that business, right? Carriers, brokers, of course. So that's pretty much a way. I mean, that they will not move forward with that measure. I think that's a major win for our region. And I was personally, I know everybody was very concerned about that. So apparently it's gone. So that's a major win for our region regarding produce. So produce will stay the same overall, apparently to what we're looking at.
Great. So we'll proceed. Seasonality and produce, that's something that's within the presentation, within the information we gathered, the Pharr International Bridge. So we'll continue with this panel. And this is the other question. A new name. President Trump wants a new name. USMC, United States-Mexico-Canada Pact. Without Canada, the C would be removed, especially avoiding the words free and trade. Mr. Gonzalez, please comment on this.
Well, I think, I mean, it's interesting to see that, and again, you know, we need to know that free trade, international trade has a lot of politics involved in it. So I think that Mr. Trump wanted to say, we have a new agreement, and why do we know that? Because it has a new name. It's definitely another one, even if the majority of the chapters are similar, or they were just tweaking parts here and there. So it's interesting how, for political purposes, they could change the name. The majority of the population of the United States are not going to read the new agreement. They're not going to really know a lot about it, but they will know that it has a new name. So it's the different one, for sure, in their understanding. So I guess that's my comment.
Mr. Torres?
Well, yeah, I mean, they want to get rid of the free trade agreement, the NAFTA, because it was so bad for the United States, right? So that's why there's going to be a new name. What is it going to be? Well, it looks like USMC, U.S. Marine Corps. I know. Well, the United States, Mexico, Canada Pact, or some other name. We still have the concern about Canada. So, but yeah, it's political. It's something that they want to rebrand it and make it a different, give it a different twist. So we'll see.
So we had chance that it would be United States-Mexico Pact only?
Yep. Could be. It could be.
Really?
I don't know.
Mr. Flores?
I think it's just a rebranding. It's something that I believe that the president just wants to indicate or show, this is what I did, more than anything else. This is what I accomplished. Trying to keep up with what he had promised to do away with NAFTA. Although he's not doing away with NAFTA, he's just doing away with the name. So he feels, one of the interviews that I saw him having a conversation with President Peña Nieto was that he feels that NAFTA has a bad connotation for the United States, that it was bad for the U.S., and that's why he's trying to get rid of the name. It's just a branding issue.
And he's going to say, I did get rid of NAFTA, so
Yeah.
the name, he accomplished it. So.
That would be good for Mr. Trump. Any comments from the audience? Comments? No? Okay, we'll proceed. The Trump administration notified Congress of its intention to sign an agreement on August 31st, initiating the 90-day period. On September 30, the treaty text must be published by the USTR. Canada should join before the dates. On November 29th, 90 days are completed. A new agreement can be signed. President Peña Nieto would still be in office. The agreement is presented to Congress of each country. The U.S. Congress has a minimum of 120 days for its review. Passes away may have a confirmed agreement is February 2019. Mr. Torres, what's your input on this?
Well, like it was discussed, the timeline was critical, and that's why Mr. Trump, even without having Canada finalize the agreement or the negotiation, he still published that document to Congress saying that his intention to sign the new trade agreement with or without Canada, so that they can have the current Mexico administration sign, and also Congress. I don't think the new Congress. There's the possibility that the Republicans are going to lose the House and Senate, so that also has something to do with it. So, I guess as far as the timeline is concerned, that's the main reason why he had to do it on August 31st without Canada, so that the clock starts ticking for the 90 days. So
we'll proceed on this. The next one. Go to the questions. This is for Mr. Gonzalez. Is it important to have a new agreement signed as soon as possible?
Well, I think that is a good question, right? I mean, I don't really see a necessity. I mean, I think that the agreement as it is, being more open, is better than the new agreement. So I personally don't think there is any rush to sign a new one. Now, regarding certainty and what the markets may feel and what investment could happen with investment, maybe it's best for everybody to have the new agreement just signed right away. Just get it over with. Again, as Jorge was saying, the timeline is mainly for political purposes. I think that Mr. Trump wanted to push this as fast as possible during the current Congress and with Mr. Peña Nieto in office, just to claim a victory prior to the midterm elections, right? So he wanted claim a victory as fast as possible. Again, so that's my take. I mean, I don't think that us in the industry definitely need it, but regarding investment and certainty, maybe it's best we have it as fast as possible.
This is for Mr. Flores. Do you anticipate any issues in this process?
There could be several issues. One is Jorge mentioned the elections, the midterm elections coming up in November, that could turn the Republican House and Senate into Democrats. Two is the authority that was given to the president. The president was given the authority to sign or negotiate a trilateral agreement, and right now we only have a bilateral agreement. And the other is just in general the time that the Congress will take, because if it is signed by November the 29th, there would be or 30th, there would be an up and down vote on it, and there would be no input from Congress, no amendments, no modifications to it. It would be as needed. So if there's changes to the House and the Senate, that could be a major issue to the president, or having this signed.
Mr. Torres?
Yes, I mean it has to do with the political aspect, and yeah, there will be issues. I mean, even if the final text of the agreement it's decent enough, if things change in Congress, it goes to the Democrats, they're gonna more than likely not gonna go forward with it just because it's a Trump deal. So so it has political implications as everything. So yeah, I mean we can see issues if they don't hold the House and the Senate.
Great. Now, audience, any questions on this, the timeline? ¿Alguna pregunta sobre este tema? Going once. Mr. Dominguez? Yes.
You guys mentioned the authority given to the president to negotiate a trilateral agreement. And I've been reading a lot of international law experts on how if the bilateral agreement is not even doable to pass Congress because it contradicts that authority given to the president, whether that could trigger back the whole process, or if it passes only on a bilateral basis, whether, could be illegal to a certain extent, or just Congress might say, you know what, we're pushing this back because it's not a trilateral negotiation, it's only a bilateral negotiation. So I guess I'm concerned about how those little legal aspects can push back the whole process, and I don't know what's your take on it.
Well, at the moment, like you mentioned, the president has authority to negotiate a trilateral agreement. We have to look at what the Constitution says. The Constitution says the president has the authority to negotiate a treaty. It's up to Congress to actually agree on it. So if Congress feels that the president has not done what they've asked him to do, I think it'll be a big issue for him, and then it'll just drag on and probably not even be signed.
Yeah, from free trade agreement negotiations perspective, yeah, there are certain rules and guidelines, but there's also constitutionality and legal precedents from prior cases, similar cases. So, I mean, it can become very complicated. Pretty sure attorneys on both sides are going to get involved to see if this can go through only with Mexico, or if it goes back and they have to go back to the drawing board and include Canada or dissipate the whole thing. Right now, I mean, it's hard to say what's going to happen until the fight will start. So.
Yes, I think that, as you mentioned, Salvador, it's very interesting, all this legal part, right? And well, I'm not a lawyer, but I have read that this could be a major part of what will happen. Mr. Trump, we know his negotiation tactics, so I've read that he's saying, Congress, you better pass this as I send it. If not, I'll just do away with NAFTA. Right? So we could see this hard tactics of saying, okay, the Congress is not willing to vote on this or pass it as I want it. Okay, I'm withdrawing from NAFTA. And he can then trigger the 6-month period for withdrawing and have that as a added pressure. So, yes, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting to see it. But we do have seen Mr. Trump resort to this type of tactics. So hopefully it won't get to that, because we're talking about certainty. So imagine that we are facing withdrawal from NAFTA from the United States. It would be not good for a region, I think.
Does anyone else like to comment on this? Charlene. Yeah, I see you like you wanna. Hey, I wanna answer to that. So it's your Mr. Lee.
So at the end of this, I'm going to say, what do you think about that? So let me just make a little statement. I've been involved with trade for over 30 years, and often there's a deadline. And so the headquarters would say, do you think we're going to meet the deadline? Over 30 years, over scores of bets, I have never lost a bet where I said it's going to take longer than shorter. Deadlines are missed all the time. Trade is always controversial. Out of frustration, one time I actually started reading the Federalist Papers, thinking that there would be some line in there that would be the Rosetta Stone that would allow us to go, oh my gosh, that's the answer. Our founding forefathers said, you know what? We reserve the right to do stupid things. So, even though they understood the importance of international commerce and they gave that to the Congress, as was stated, they also reserved the right to be protectionist or counterproductive. It's one of those deals where you never really win the battle, but you have to stay engaged. And when you all meet 2 years from now, when Ken comes here again and gives you the new numbers and what have you, this still is going to be in process, if you will, as far as issues being worked out. So the key is you cannot cede the playing field to the other side. If trade is important to Pharr, and it is really important to Pharr, you've got to stay engaged. And what do you think about that?
I agree. I totally agree with that.
Great. So what do you think about that? You guys, the audience. Margarita. We'll proceed. Oh, Mr. Flores, go ahead.
As president of the association, we've thrown around some ideas on how to promote or get behind the free trade and the trade industry. And we are in the process of developing a letter where we would send to our congressmen, our senators, say, hey, look, free trade is good for our area. So that's something that we are working on right now. Yes.
Just wanted to make a quick comment regarding that. At the end of the day, it's not politicians that are trading. It's not the ones that are trying to change policies. It's not the ones that are in Washington. It's the folks here. It's the folks that are crossing borders, the folks that are moving product, you know, shifting gears. So at the end of the day, you know, you're completely correct on that. You know, we need to get the private sector more involved in the renegotiation. I think it should have always been involved since the beginning. But, you know, I know they've had side meetings and then they take it in to another room, and then you have the big wigs or the politicians make the decisions. But at the end of the day, you guys are the ones that should be in charge of those decisions, because you're the end users, you're the importers, you're the exporters, you're the ones that are moving products. So I think that was a very, very good statement.
So now we'll go to our main components. I heard right now Mr. Torres talked about rules of origin, automotive industry. Within the automotive industry, we'll be talking about the produce seasonality, dispute settlement, and labor. Okay, Mr. Torres, well, let me go back. Rules of origin. Can you please explain to us what's the rules of origin? What does that mean? Rules.
Well, pretty much every free trade agreement has is conditionally free. It's not free trade. It has certain conditions that need to be met. And in the case of NAFTA, it's the Rules of Origin Annex 401, which dictate by tariff classification what needs to be done in order to meet free trade agreement. So there are rules. I don't want to get technical, but there are tariff shift provision and regional value content provision. In the particular case of the automotive industry, is based on for automobiles, is based on regional value content, meaning that X percentage of the content has to come from North America, both raw materials and value-added labor. So that's what the rules of origin dictate whether a product can be duty-free or not, or take preferential treatment under the trade agreement.
So as we read here, it's previously regional value content of at least 62.5%, agreed the regional value content of at least 75%, and at least 40% of the value of autos and parts must be made by workers paid $16 or more per hour. What's your intake on that, Mr. Gonzalez?
Well, overall, this is not something that not something good. I think, you know, the rules are more strict as we're seeing. The previous regional value content was a 62.5%. Now it increased, so more of the product has to contain parts of the region. Now again, this is not necessarily bad, right? When we have more integration, it's not necessarily bad, but what we don't want is to force companies to source within the region when they can get components cheaper or better quality from other parts of the world. I mean, we want to have a balance, right? We want the content to be from the region, but we don't want to pressure companies too much that the products end up being less quality or more expensive. So that's my take on this. And I mean, it's not, we're talking about the context of the new agreement, right? How this is maybe the best that we could hope for right now. But overall, this is not something good, right? But this is something that I'm sure companies will have to deal with. And well, the question maybe is for the audience to know what is the impact of this on them. I mean, do you guys think it's going to impact your production? Are you going to move more product or less? Or what will happen? I think that's the interesting question here.
Mr. Flores?
I'll focus more on the $16 per hour rate. I think that the reason that was implemented is because of they want to create more jobs here in the U.S. They want to bring back jobs to the U.S. and Canada. Obviously, right now, the U.S. and Canada have a higher wage per hour than Mexico does. But we're losing jobs, as they say, we're losing jobs to Mexico. So they're trying to bring something back to the U.S., and that's where that $16 per hour minimum comes in. Will it hurt? Yeah, it's going to hurt in the end, because eventually the vehicle is going to become more expensive. I mean, you're paying more for your workers, so that means that you have to cover more at the end of when the vehicle is done.
Yes, going back to the increase in regional value content, yeah, it went from 62.5 to 75%. So originally they wanted, the U.S. wanted 85%, and 50% of that coming from the U.S. only. So this was, I mean, from 62.5 to 75%. Well, it's okay. It's 12.5%, and it's going to be done over a 3-year period. So that's going to give times for companies to readjust their sourcing. And most, based on Secretary Guajardo's comments, most companies will be able to meet that that content. But the other one, the 40 to 45%, actually is 40 to 45%, and they say that 40% will be for vehicles and 45% for trucks. That's going to be interesting and to some degree complicated because, you know, we don't know the mechanisms that are going to put in place to support or define, you know, the guidelines on how to meet the $16 per hour. Is it average? Is it by line worker only? Who knows? But like Crispin said, you know, this is created, this was put there so that more than likely the assembly plants will be staying in the United States because the majority of the value will come from the 40% will come from the actual assembly of the vehicles, and also from some of the high value components such as engines, transmissions, chassis, etc. So maybe some of the smaller component assemblers, manufacturers might not be that impacted by this, but we'll see. We don't know the exact rules on how this is going to come into play. So
that means the vehicles will get more expensive, right?
Very likely, yeah, there's going to be an increase.
So I'll continue driving my Honda, so that's okay, I guess. So we'll go to the next one right here. This is for Mr. Gonzalez, quotas in the automotive industry. First of all, Mr. Gonzalez, can you please explain to us what's a quota? What's the definition for quotas?
So a quota, it's a type of non-tariff barrier, meaning that the country can limit the amount of product being imported to a certain amount. As you stated there, there is apparently a side letter or a side agreement, according to several reports, right? We have yet to see it, that would limit the assembly auto exports from Mexico to the U.S. to 2.4 million annual units, and that's 40% over the current volume of exports. And in parts, they're talking about 90 billion annually, 20% over its current value of exports. So this is not something good, right? I mean, pretty much everybody that is already in this industry would be covered, right? So you have your current volume plus, let's say, 40% average to grow. But what about new investment? Those new investment may say, why will I invest if I could fall into this in excess of the quota and I would be liable for maybe up to 25% duty? So that's not something good. I mean, and again, we see how the administration of Mr. Donald Trump is wanting to target new investment. He's saying, I don't want to damage what's going on right now, but new investment, you better think twice where you're going to invest. So definitely not something good, right? We don't want limits on our trade. Imagine you guys exporting and saying, I'm having such a good year, but now whatever I export is going to be subject to a 25% duty. That will not be something you will be looking forward to, right? So that's my take on that.
Mr. Flores?
My understanding on this situation is that once the quotas are used, that the vehicles will go back to the most favored nation rate, which is 2.5%. If there's an excessive import of those vehicles at that rate, then he could put the vehicles on Section 232 and move it up to 25%. So there's nothing in writing, there's nothing specific or in stone that says this is what's going to happen. I mean, this is what we're reading. It's something that again, we won't know until later on this week or at the end of the week.
Mr. Flores?
Yeah, I mean, this is very concerning, especially for new investment. Also, the possibility of having Section 232 tariffs on automobiles and auto parts is very concerning because that will trigger the 25%. That is going on right now. There is an investigation already open by the Department of Commerce on Section 232 for auto parts and automobiles. So whether or not they're going to put it in place, that's something that we'll have to see. I know there's a lot of pressure right now, political pressure, for this not to happen, but you never know. But we have to be looking at this very carefully and how is it going to play out. So just keep monitoring, that's all.
Audience, would you like to comment on this? How many maquiladoras are within the automotive industry? ¿Cuántas maquiladoras aquí están? ¿Nada más usted? ¿Le gustaría comentar? Okay, we'll proceed with this. Okay, Salvador.
I guess going back to the opening remarks on who benefits from trade wars, sometimes it's third parties. If you go back to those rules and in fact they don't default to most favorable nation and jumps to 25%, then who benefits is Brazil because they're a big auto manufacturer and parts maker. And to companies, it probably will make more sense to source something from Brazil than rather from Mexico, in which from the Mexican can be defaulted at 25 and the Brazilian one's at 2.5 or whatever. So back to your statement, who benefits is whoever is not on the trade war. In this case, Brazil, it's a big parts manufacturer.
Just as an additional comment, the Section 232 for automobiles and auto parts will be in general. It will be worldwide. There might be some countries that might be exempted or put in quotas as well, but it is something that they're looking at not only for Mexico, but worldwide. So.
Just to put this in perspective, and we've all gotten like a master's degree on trade over the last 2 years. You know, generally, when you think about ways to restrict trade, the most common is when there's a pricing discrepancy. It's called anti-dumping, and it's very common. There's a lot of rules built in. You know, you may be for it or against it, but all in all, the process is pretty fair. And then occasionally, a company or an industry says, hey, we just can't compete. So we need protection. And the most famous case was the Harley-Davidson case back in the 80s, where you put tariffs in place for a period of time, and the industry uses that time to adjust. And that's the 201. And when we talked about washing machines and what have you, that's what was used. And that's legitimate. It's allowed. You're allowed to do it. Countries usually treat that very seriously because you're affecting unfairly traded goods, but you're also affecting fairly traded goods. And you never really want to go after fairly traded goods. What has changed dramatically is 232. Now, 232 is for national security. The statute goes back to 1962, and if you remember 1962, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, the height of the Cold War, and they wanted to give more authority to the president to do things to support the national defense. And that was based on another law that goes back to 1954, also the height of the Cold War. After 1986, it was first of all hardly ever used, because if you say something's in the national security, your trading partners are going to say their products are in the national security. So you really want to keep this very rarely used and very precise. What happened with steel and aluminum was the president used it as a blunderbuss, and he went after everybody. He said the Canadians were a national security threat, which really offended them because they, on a proportional basis, had as many casualties in Afghanistan as we have. And if anyone's ever gone to the beaches of Normandy, the only beach that had almost the same amount of casualties as the Americans had there were at Juno Beach. And the Canadians, which was a Canadian beach, and the Canadians have always felt they were our closest ally. And for us to say they were a national security, that their fairly traded steel and aluminum threatened the national security, took great insult to them. And when you're in Canada, the average person will come up to you and talk about how they're not buying Heinz ketchup anymore, sort of as in retaliation. The president has the authority right now. It's being challenged constitutionally, which that process is moving forward. But when you go after your closest allies and you say you're no longer an ally but you're a threat, it's insulting. And in theory, he's threatening 25% auto tariffs against all sorts of different countries right now. The president is. Maybe that will be the tipping point, because I have to say I've given about a dozen presentations around the country, and I have never had anyone come up to me, and maybe you will afterwards, and say, I believe in tariffs. I want more tariffs. Most people just say, why, we just cut taxes. Why do we want to increase taxes now? But I do think a 25% tariff on automobiles, or even a 10% tariff, would be the tipping point where I think the average citizen would really say enough is enough.
I agree. I mean, Section 232, I personally has been, I don't want to say misused, but taken advantage by the president. You know, he can say everything's national security threat, and he will dictate to the Department of Commerce and the U.S. Trade Representative to say, yeah, it is. So he has the executive order to act on that. So I think it's right now with the steel aluminum, I think it was abused. And if it goes forward with the Section 232, like you mentioned, something has to be done. I've heard that there's somebody wants to put some legislation to limit the president his executive power on Section 232 and other measures like that, so that it has to go to Congress instead of by executive order. Whether or not that's going to fly, we don't know, but it is something that has to be looked at because times have changed. Like you said, this was put in place in the 60s with the Cold War, and that was probably at that time it was needed. But now, I don't think that has to be used anymore to the degree that it's being used right now. I mean, I don't want to get political, but it is affecting everybody. And at the end of the day, the consumer is going to pay for that. So.
I agree, no, and it's very interesting to me to see how these duties play out, right? We saw that Whirlpool was the one seeking Section 201 duties for their protection, right? They said, you know what, we can't compete with LG and Samsung, so please help us with Section 201. The president said, yes, you got it. They were awesome. They were happy, right? They were being benefited from that. Then Section 232 came that impacted the steel and aluminum they used for the washing machines, and they said, well, but we don't like these ones, Mr. Trump, right? So can you take them away? He said, no, it's for everybody. So we see how this happens, and the companies that maybe benefited from one duty are affected by the other, and overall, sales are down for Whirlpool. That's what I read. I mean, I don't know if anybody has any more recent information. I've spoken to companies, and this is a big steel company in Mexico, and I was asking Ben, have you been hurt because of Section 232 duties on your steel going to the United States? And he said, you know what has been interesting, because we also have facilities in Argentina and Brazil, and those are subject to quotas, and they're still free, so we're exporting from there, and duties having, price of steel has increased, so it's not been so bad for us. So we see that ultimately, I mean, do we want companies to gain more profits from maneuvering and from being able to work the government, or do we want them to get more money and profits from an actual competitive, good product that they sell to people? So I think that's the difference in that, and I think that's a very interesting point.
And again, if we have more questions. Okay.
What is the current auto worker wage in Mexico versus U.S., and how did they come up with the $16 per hour? What was the logic behind that decision?
I think as far as the logic, we don't know it. It's some, I don't know if there's any logic, maybe some labor studies between the three countries. I think the average labor rate is somewhere around $3.50 to $4 per hour in Mexico. So that's based on minimum wage plus fringe benefits. So that's a big jump. I mean, from $4, let's say $4 fully fringe to $16, that's a $12 difference.
So you said $3?
$3.50 an hour.
$3.50, $4 per hour.
It's a big difference, sir.
Now we know that a lot of maquilas are paying more than that because there's there's labor shortages. So that's going up, but because of the supply and demand type of situation.
We will go ahead and proceed. I know we're running out of time. This is really interesting. You know, any questions, any concerns, please, at the end of this, you can come up to the panel or Mr. Lane or even Ken Roberts or myself, and we'll continue with this. We'll go with the next one. We'll skip this one because pretty much we talked about it already. So this, I don't know if this could happen. Other changes in rules of origin. Mr. Gonzalez, electronics, textiles, and produce. Please comment on this.
Well, I don't have any specific comments. I do know that some industry in electronics were actually looking forward to changes to the rules of origin. They were very impacted heavily by China. We saw the numbers, and I really saw that there was a lot of TVs being imported, and we know which company is it, right? It's right across the SLG. So what I've heard is that they were actually in conjunction with Sony that were looking to improve rules of origin to get a product, TVs specifically, not being just Chinese, being imported, disassembled, and then assembled, and that those will be qualifying for NAFTA before the agreement. So overall, there's nothing, not everything is a bad news. There are industries that are being benefited from changes in rules of origin.
Mr. Flores.
I'll touch the textiles. On textiles under NAFTA, the components that are taken into consideration for preferential treatment are the components that make up the actual garment. A lot of the pocketing, the lining, the threads are not taken into consideration and are not part of the rules of origin. So at this time, what they're proposing is all those items that were excluded from being considered as far as originating or not, they're going to be put back into the equation. So it's going to make it more difficult for Mexico to use foreign components that previously were not being used. They're hoping that can come back to the United States or maybe Canada and move into that area. Then there's another issue on TPO certificates. I don't know if there's any textile companies here, but a TPO certificate allows for a Mexican company to cut and sew the product in Mexico and then obtain a certificate from the Mexican government, Hacienda, to be able to import it duty-free. There is a limit to those, which is 45 million square meter equivalents, but those, they're trying to do away with those also. So that's the major change that's going on in the textile industry.
Mr. Torres, what's TPL?
TPL is tariff preference levels, like Crispin was saying. It's like a quota. It's 45 million square meters per year that it's allowed under NAFTA, which they can use non-NAFTA fabric in Mexico to cut and assemble, mainly wearing apparel. So they allow these quotas by category, and it's a certificate that is issued by the Secretaría de Economía, and that's how they can take advantage of a free duty rate for products that have no NAFTA content or that do not meet the NAFTA rules.
Okay.
Just a quick comment. Produce, well, nothing changed in produce. I mean, it stays the same. There are some changes in certain chemical products and certain metal products. But going back to electronics, in a way, that's the winner because they're going to relax the rules of origin for a lot of the electronic products. So there will be a benefit for companies that make telecommunication, electronics, TVs, etc., with the new trade agreement. So.
Okay. So now we'll jump to the next one. It's seasonality in produce. We talked about it earlier today. So, Mr. Gonzalez, abolish free trade regime will continue. What's your take on this right here?
Yes, well, we were saying I think this is a big win for our region. Fortunately, the seasonality clause is not going to be enforced. So I think that's a major win for our region, and that's what we wanted, right? So I think that's
major win for the city of Pharr.IT, right? Because we're the #1 importer.
Definitely.
On produce, right?
And yeah.
So a round of applause for the Pharr International Bridge, you know? Yeah, wake up. So Mr. Flores guarantees free trade to new agriculture, biotechnology.
The agreement is that both governments will allow their producers, their growers to use new technology to improve the seeds, the harvesting, the producing of the produce. So it's something that it's positive because it allows for new investment in both countries. The only thing that I, like I said earlier, was that I don't see as positive is that they're not going to be able to use any subsidies or any assistance from the World Trade Organization. So that might hurt a bit, but all in all, I think it's a good thing for the produce industry.
See, where are the produce importers? Where are they at? Any questions? How many produce companies here? Any more questions? I have one question. If you guys have a question for this, and now we'll proceed.
Well, I think that's a very good question, right? I think I personally expect the growth to continue to be stable, upward growth. And you know, it all depends on many different aspects, right? We see the taste of the United States consumer. People have become much more healthier, right? People have a big appetite for avocados now, right, as well, and that has helped our region a lot. And that's, so I think the more the consumers shift to healthier products, the better for our produce industry. I don't really see anything else that can change that. We'll see what happens with the trade disagreements from the United States and China to see if there's a disruption in supply chains of U.S. exports that could change the preference of some consumers, meaning if people have more access to pistachios and they're cheaper, will they then buy more pistachios than a Mexican-grown berry or product? So I think that all comes into play, right? Supply and demand, and that's the interesting part of it. But overall, I think it will become a good, strong growth, being stable.
Sure, if I may add to that, I believe that Texas A&M AgriLife Extension put together a study that indicates that within the next 3 years, we'll be actually growing just through this land port of entry as far as perishables, produce, being imported from Mexico by another, I think it was either 43 or 53%. So that was probably right around the time when we started talking about the renegotiations, so that might have changed. I believe, I know Hector's here from TIPA, Texas International Produce Association. Hector, is there something out there that you might want to add to that? These guys are the encyclopedia of produce, so he'll probably have more information for you.
Thank you, Luis. My name's Hector Garza with the Texas International Produce Association. Now, that is true. The Center for North American Studies at Texas A&M, we do a study every year with them, and they've projected since about 5 years ago that these increased imports will continue to go up. And we've seen, you know, the scale go up and down for Nogales, but far in all the ports of Texas have actually been going up. Honestly, the demand for fresh produce, especially in the U.S., is up, and we don't see that going down at all. We don't foresee the demand going down. So no matter what, we're going to see the imports coming. I know these changes, you know, it's scary to see all this rhetoric, but right now a lot of it's just that rhetoric. All these negotiations that are happening, so far we already got, you know, Mexico already involved. Canada, from what I understand, the thing is, since the term for the presidency is not up, there wasn't really a rush to try to get this negotiation done with them. So it's still there. It's going to happen. Before NAFTA, how do we get produce over here? You know, we had produce coming across, so it's going to get done. But you know, we do get nervous because of the way our president talks. But as far as importations, you know, we foresee them still going up.
October the 11th, I know Freddie's going to bring this up in his closing remarks, but I want to just make a mention of it now. I invite everybody here on October the 11th to the Pharr Bridge, because we're going to have Texas Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller here. And I know he'll be able to discuss this more in depth and talk about the growth for produce, I believe, in Texas, but more importantly here through Pharr. So again, that's going to be October the 11th. It's going to be the start of the produce season event that we do once a year, and that'll be here at the bridge at 10 a.m.
So we'll be waiting for everybody at 10 a.m. So we'll proceed with this. Seasonality in produce. Mr. Torres, why is this good for us?
It's good for us because during the certain part of the years, the growth or production of produce here in the U.S. is low, so it's best that we allow it to come in duty-free.
Torres?
Yeah, I guess we comment that they got rid of the seasonality, so produce can flow back and into the United States without having an impact on seasonality in the United States. So I think that's like we discussed, it's a positive thing for the produce industry.
Okay, now we'll go to sunset class. Mr. Gonzalez, what's your take on sunset class? Can you please explain to us what's that?
Well, we're talking then again about the part that impacts foreign investment into Mexico. Initially, the Mr. Trump administration was suggesting that a sunset clause every 5 years, meaning if there was no agreement in 5 years, the agreement could be canceled. Now they arrived to a compromise that the agreement will be reviewed every 6 years, and if not agreed upon, it will expire after 10 years, and I'm sure we have some more information about that. So the minimum period of the agreement in general will be 16 years. So we see that will likely fall into at least 2 presidencies. So what I've heard is that the Mexican government agreed that if one president wanted to cancel the agreement and the next one wanted to cancel the agreement, then it was pretty much a lost cause. But if we have a Republican and then a Democrat, and then that more likely we could see a change in scope from a new president, and that would be that would protect the agreement, and that was again the best that they could agree upon. So even if this is not a positive outcome, a sunset clause I don't think it's positive, maybe was what the best that they could agree on.
Mr. Torres?
Yeah, like it's mentioned here, the agreement is in place for 16 years. And then in 6 years, they're going to be doing a review. And at that time, they can approve another 16 years. So in reality, this trade agreement can be extended up to 32 years. Now, if they don't extend it for another 16 years, then it will expire within 10 years, which will be a total of 16 years. I don't know if I confused you or not, but in bottom line, it's 16 years. So compared to the 5 years, I think it's better than nothing. You know, I think it gives some certainty. A lot of investments are not done for 5 years. I mean, at least 10 years. So this gives some certainty.
Will this benefit or affect foreign and local investment in our region? Mr. Flores?
I think it'll benefit our region because it gives the investors the opportunity to hold on to something for at least minimum 6 years, and then, well, actually 16 years. So it's something good for the industry, because you want to have some type of certainty if you're going to invest millions and millions of dollars in the area. So I think it'll be a good thing for everybody here in the area.
Dispute settlement, Mr. Torres. What's your take on dispute settlement? Please explain to us.
Well, these chapters in NAFTA were the ones that Mexico really cave in, and there's been a lot of criticism for Secretary Guajardo for giving in on these two. In particular, I'm going to talk about Chapter 11, dispute investor. Pretty much, they got rid of dispute investor settlements, which means that if a particular industry or business is being affected by a government, they have the right to fight it. Well, in this particular case, they only pretty much allow this for energy sector, so they got rid of the other industries. So this is an area where Mexico lost, honestly. So, but that's what they agreed on. So.
I agree that this was, again, a tactic from the United States administration to make U.S. investors think more about investing in Mexico. We know that the rule of law generally, right, people are more worried about investing in Mexico because of what could happen if the government decides to do any action that would impact that investment. Before, the U.S. investor could go to an arbitration panel, and the arbitration panel will make the final decision. Now they will need to go to the local country's court system, and that, of course, is making U.S. investors nervous that going into. So again, this is interesting, right? Because it generally would say, well, Mexico has more control of it, but Mexico was a country that didn't want this to happen because they wanted investors to feel as safe as possible. So that's my take on that.
We'll go to labor now. We'll go to Mr. Torres, Jorge Torres. Why is the labor provision so important to the United States, Mr. Torres?
Well, for labor purposes, I mean, I think what the United States wants, and this is something, I don't want to get into the politics, but it might be positive to Mexico because with this, the United States, in a way, negotiated, better conditions for the Mexican workers, like it says here, guarantee the fulfillment of labor provisions in the treaty, strengthening the collective bargaining in Mexico, and adopt and maintain their rights under the International Labor Organization, and do not renounce or eliminate these laws, and more enforcement. So in a way, this will be beneficial to the Mexican workers, so that's something that they agreed upon. So it is important because it will put workers in a more, going back to the salary issue on the $60 per hour, it's trying to put workers in Mexico at the same level or at close as much as possible at the same level as in the United States from regarding salaries and rights. So that's my take on this.
Mr. Gonzalez?
Well, I agree with Jorge, right? I mean, this is a different subject, right? But we can argue and discuss what is the future for Mexico, right? The United States is I think the message is, Mexico, please stop being a low-cost labor country and start becoming a more added value to your products. I think that message, even if it should not be imposed, is a message that Mexico should receive and say, you know, yes, we want to move from being just low cost into more value added, into giving our people more money to spend internally so that everybody can benefit. And I know every local trader, every local seller says, yes, I wish people had more money to spend here. So, you know, maybe this is the little push that it's needed. Again, this is, let's see what happens, right?
We'll go to the other one. It's other important provisions, e-commerce, intellectual property, financial services. Mr. Crispin Flores, please comment on this.
This is an area that on the e-commerce, I'm not familiar with, so.
Okay, that's good. Mr. Torres, I know that, I don't know you guys.
Well, again, you know, like e-commerce, they're not gonna put duties on e-commerce. That's a provision that they wanted to have. So that gives certainty on e-commerce. The better protection for intellectual property rights. They're really gonna go really full-blown on copyrights and patents and licenses for copyrighted products. So they're gonna be enforcing that. They're asking Mexico to enforce that as well. So we won't see that many counterfeit products moving back and forth. So that's from the intellectual property rights. And financial services, well, again, giving more certainty for financial transactions and more traceability to avoid the, well, how can I say it, that money from the drug smuggling and contraband doesn't flow through it's washed or cleaned through processes. So that's been ongoing. So those are my comments on those three aspects. They're going to be reinforced. And I think it's for the better. I mean, those are positive things.
Okay, we'll proceed. This is for Mr. Gonzalez, the alternatives. Is this agreement good for our region overall?
You know, I think so. I think that this is the best that we could hope for during seeing what's going on pretty much worldwide, right, with the backlash on globalization. So I think this is good, right? I mean, again, it's not best, it's not what I hope for, but I think that given the situation, this is something that is good. We will need to adjust. We will need to make changes, all of us, right? But I think we can definitely take on the challenge.
Mr. Torres, do you think that Mexico rushed into the agreement? Do you think that Mexico rushed into the agreement?
Well, from the earlier comments, it's not that they had no choice, but they saw how things were transpiring with Section 232 and Section 301, and with the changes with the administration, that they said we better come to terms, and it was not so much a matter of substance, but to get something done. So you can say that they rushed into it, but there were some valid reasons as to why they did it.
Okay, the third one, number 3, it's for either or, you know, Mr. Flores, Torres, Gonzalez.
Okay.
Okay.
Does U.S. trade conflict with China affect our region? Yes, it does. Right now, well, actually, last Monday, the United States published a list of over 5,700 HTS numbers that are subject to a additional duty rate of 10%. If this trade pact war does not end from now until February, that is going to go up to 25%. So you're going to have over close to 7,000 or 8,000 HTS numbers that will be subject to 25% if the products are of Chinese origin. So will it affect it? Yes. Our local companies, maquiladoras, need to find a way to circumvent that additional tariff. So it's very important that they start looking at their supply chain and see how they can avoid that.
Well, I need to thank Ken for the information that I saw, that the number one partner country for the Port of Pharr is, of course, Mexico, but the number two is China, right? And we need to also know that it is not because it's for logistical purposes, right? It's because, I mean, and overall, I think this is Chinese product that has been given value added in Reynosa, and it's coming back. So, of course, that impacts us, right? Because if that product is under those lists, the Chinese component plus the Mexican value added will be subject to 25% duty depending on the product. So it definitely affects us. I would say that it's the right time for companies to look into, even if their product is not subject to NAFTA eligibility, they should look if they can mark the product made in Mexico and thus avoiding those Chinese tariffs. So yes, it may not seem like that, but we are very affected also by the tariff dispute between the United States and China.
Mr. Torres?
I think the conflict or the trade war between China and Mexico, in a way, it's going to sound interesting how I word it, but it's positive to our region and it's positive to the maquiladora industry, because like Adrian mentioned, country of origin now is critical. So we're already seeing a lot of companies looking to transfer production lines from China into Mexico to make a product that is not, so that it cannot be subject to the 25%, regardless whether it qualifies for NAFTA or not, because that way they can avoid the 25%. So, yeah, I mean, and then you can move those components from China if you want to bring raw material in bond or in bonded warehouses of foreign trade zones or directly through Mexico and do the assembly and manufacturing and make it a Mexican product, therefore exporting it to the United States without having to pay the 25 or 10% as it is right now. So we see that as an opportunity. Now, I've been asked, how long is this going to last with China? Well, I don't think it's a short-term deal. It's going to take a while to get things sorted out. China is not caving in. They just as soon as the United States announced the third round of tariffs, immediately they also impose additional tariffs on $60 billion of products from the United States into China. So I think that is going to be ongoing. And now there's another threat by the administration that right now what we have is almost 50% of the total trade between the United States and China is subject to Section 301. There is a possibility that later on this year we'll hear an announcement from President Trump that he wants to impose additional Section 301 tariffs on the other half of the products coming from China. So we don't know when this is going to end, but it's going to be here for a while. So, you know, we better look into it carefully. So.
Well, this will conclude our Bridge Connect for today. But we would like to take one more question. Una pregunta más. Si tiene una pregunta, you have one more question, please feel free to ask. Si no hay preguntas, con esto vamos a estar terminando. Más, okay. Yeah. Con eso vamos a estar terminando más. Sin embargo, you know, don't take off. Yo sé que ya nos queremos ir. Todos se firmaron ahí su nombre. Todos pusieron su nombre ahí. You can sign in, put your phone number, your email address. Now we're going to ask Vanessa to come here up front, please. Vanessa and Cleo, they'll be, I guess, if you put your business card, you dropped it in that little box there, you'll be, you know, I guess they select the first one or third one. I don't know how they're going to handle it, but someone's going to get something for free today. And also I know they're going to be giving away one prize to, I don't know who now, because we wanted to give it to the person that asked the first question, but I lost track of that. No sé quién fue el primero que preguntó la primera pregunta. ¿Quién fue? Bill. Who was that? Bill? Bill.
Otra
otra cosita, Freddy. Nada más les pedimos, por favor, que aparte de los nombres, de la información, para que sigan recibiendo las invitaciones de este tipo de eventos, que también el cuestionario es muy importante para nosotros porque así podemos seguir mejorando estas sesiones de Bridge Connect. Así que les pedimos, por favor, que hagan sus comentarios ahí. También atrás del evento, del programa del evento, está también el número de teléfono y el correo electrónico de Freddy, por si hay sugerencias para futuros Bridge Connect, por favor nos los hagan llegar. Muchísimas gracias.
And again, we would like to thank Bill Lane, Ken Roberts, making it out here to South Texas. This is the beautiful city of Pharr. We welcome you. Thanks again on behalf of the city manager, Juan Guerra, on behalf of our mayor, Ambrosio Hernandez, and our director, which you know, Luis Bazan. Round of applause for our panel together. Round of applause for Vanessa and Cleo, for the whole team putting all this together today. God bless you. Be safe. Put your seatbelts on and keep hydrated, and also continue eating your vegetables and fruits, please. So fuerte el aplauso al panel. No se me vayan. Por favor, no se vayan. Vamos a estar tomando unas fotos. Aquí enseguida, ¿alguien más tiene una tarjeta? ¿Nadie tiene tarjeta? No, una tarjetita, un papel, nadie. Okay, so Vanessa, how do you want to do this? The first one? Okay. I was trying to get, estaba tratando de dar una oportunidad, pero tengo que going once, going twice. Well done. Well done. Yeah. You do that. What are we giving away? Okay, vamos a estar regalando estas plumas importadas desde Italia. Ah, no, desde China. ¿Cuánto pagó el arancel de esto? Plumas desde China, ¿cuánto se pagó? ¿Quién entendió algo hoy? 2 cents, okay. This is going to San Salazar, going once, going twice. You need to run to the front. One time. Okay, bueno, con el aplauso. Okay, Media, please take a photo of this, please. Come on, we need to put this in there. Come on. Con el aplauso. Round of applause for, how do you pronounce your name? Said? Said. There you go, sir. Next. This is another pen. This one. It's from U.S. Okay, so it's duty free. This is from our Lord Jesus. If you're not here, you're not allowed to win. Okay, that's the rule. Steve Taylor, he's not here today. I know his representative is here, but he left. Too bad. That's why you're not supposed to take off. So next Bridge Connect, a los otros Bridge Connects, va a haber más premios. So ya saben, ya saben. So digan a los gerentes ahí de planta que los dejan venir, por favor. El siguiente que es para Rosendo Salinas. Rosendo Salinas. Going once, going twice. Rosendo Salinas. The London Fruits. No? Freddie? No, this right here is for Minerva Loera from Loera Custom Brokers. You need a custom broker, Minerva Loera. Yes, sir. Fuerte el aplauso. Ese fue propaganda. You have the first question. So I'm going to give you something. It's all right. Okay. Vamos a dar. Okay, it's a bag. But I think we're going to skip it because I don't see Alex here. Alex Garcia with Godinez International. No? Go once, twice? Okay, he's gone. Next. Hector Garza with the Texas International Produce Association. He left. Okay. See? Se van pronto más premios. We're going to have some premios. Not to take off. We're going to take a group photo right now. Alex Garcia. Hey, this guy was cheating, He put 2 cards, but he took it. I don't see another Alex here, so he's gone. Hey, tírate mucho al piso. Como quiera, ese que está aquí no está. Si lo conozco, no está, ya se fue. No diga nada, lo voy a sacar una vez. Una mano santa. Ferrera Candy. Que nos dé, ¿trajiste chocolates o algo a cambio o no? No, ok. Les going for Gerardo Lozano. Fuerte el aplauso a nuestro Gerardo. Por favor, Gerardo, por favor. Y no se vayan porque recuerden, por ahí les van a estar regalando, les van a estar pasando. A la salida está la invitación para nuestro Start of the Produce Season, lo que Luis mencionaba. Es importante que usted participe, es algo muy bien, muy bonito. Vienen muchos oficiales del gobierno y sería muy bien que usted participe. Otra cosa, eso que tiene ahí enfrente, lléveselo por favor, no lo deje. Si usted lo deja ahí, ya no nos van a dar fondos para que volvamos a hacer esto. Eso por favor lléveselo, que no se quede nada. No le digan a nadie que les dije eso, nomás lléveselo por favor. A la salida está la invitación, ¿ok? Octubre 11. Y el otro que ganó es GTA, Agencias Aduanales, René Rodríguez. René Rodríguez, going once, going twice. Ahí está, ahí viene. Ese es el último, es el premio mayor. Valeo Adriana Saraí González. Adriana Saraí González. Going once, going twice. Está en el baño. Nos están comentando desde las oficinas de Washington, el que salga con el mejor nombre de NAFTA 2.0, le van a dar un premio muy grande, un premio mayor. So, si usted se va y mándalo por correo ahí a Pharr.IT, not today, but you know, the future, send us something, come up with some names. NAFTA 2.0, NAFTA, I guess, under Crazy Trump, or NAFTA, or something like that, you know. So, bueno, mire, la señorita está en el baño. Se lo vamos a entregar ahí al joven que es su compañero. So, sí se vale eso, porque quizá todavía. Ok, so, muchas gracias por haber venido. Llévense todo lo que está en la mesa. Por favor, llévense su invitación ahí a la salida. Gracias a todos por haber venido.